The boy woke up in an unfamiliar place and immediately realized that he had been reincarnated. He pinched himself to make sure it was real, quickly confirming that it was not a dream. Looking around, he saw people nearby and assumed that this was now the world where he would live. His surprise deepened when a god suddenly appeared before him. His thoughts drifted back to the moment it all began. The god had been desperately apologizing and sincerely asking for forgiveness. Confused by the unexpected apology, he listened as the god tried to explain that her own incompetence had caused what happened to Mr. Shinomiya. Before she could continue, he stopped her for a moment because he could not understand what was happening. She paused briefly before revealing the truth. A short while earlier, Mr. Shinomiya had died in an accident. At that moment, his memories returned, and he realized what had happened, understanding that he was now in the afterlife. He wondered if the one standing before him was a Shinigami, but the god immediately denied it without hesitation. Since the explanation would take some time, the god suggested moving somewhere more comfortable. After they sat down, she offered him a drink before introducing herself as Samdala, the chief of the heavenly realm. She encouraged him to simply call her Samadhi. As he was about to introduce himself, she stopped him, already knowing that he was Mr. Shinomiya. He was surprised by that, while Samadhi simply smiled. Samadhi explained that she had summoned him there to tell him why he had ended up in such a situation. She explained that gods exist to guide humans, but one particular god had shamelessly abandoned that duty. That god had broken one of the heavenly realm's taboos and interfered with Mr. Shinomiya's fate. As he listened, several incidents immediately came to his mind. There had been the time when a bookshelf suddenly fell over even though he had never touched it. There was also the suspension bridge that collapsed the moment he tried to cross it. Then there was the time his parents discovered each other's affairs, causing their family to fall apart. Samadhi continued explaining that the rogue god had been extremely skilled at avoiding the heavenly realm's supervision while continuing to interfere with Mr. Shinomiya's life. Eventually, those constant manipulations led to the accident that claimed his life. Understanding everything at last, he quietly accepted the explanation. Samadhi lowered her head and apologized once more, explaining that these circumstances had forced her to summon his soul to heaven. However, despite being the chief of the heavenly realm, she admitted that she did not have the power to return him to his original world. Shinomiya asked her to raise her head, already accepting that he could never return to his previous life. Hearing that, Samadhi proposed another solution, reincarnation. He asked whether she meant being reborn in a different world. She explained that it was her way of making amends for what had happened. He spent some time thinking about the proposal before deciding to seriously consider it. Samadhi then asked if he had always admired fantasy worlds like the ones found in games and anime. She explained that she intended to send him to another world where he could begin a completely new life and asked what he thought of the idea. Shinomiya accepted the offer without hesitation, and Samadhi was pleased, having expected that he would gladly agree to her proposal. Samadhi snapped her fingers, and a screen filled with information appeared before them. Shinomiya looked at it and wondered if it displayed his abilities. Samadhi confirmed that it did. She explained that only his soul was present there, so most of his abilities had already been lost. However, the techniques and knowledge he had developed on Earth remained in the form of skills and special abilities. As he examined the list, he noticed the cooking skill. It reminded him that he had not been living with his parents and had learned to cook for himself. He then saw the special ability called high memory capacity. He realized it was probably connected to his exceptional memory, which allowed him to remember an entire textbook after reading it only once. Samadhi offered him another cup of his drink and explained that new skills could be obtained through training. However, special abilities were different. They could only be gained through an inborn talent or by receiving them from a god sometime in the distant future. Shinomiya asked whether he would be able to keep his abilities after being reincarnated. Samadhi assured him that he would, adding that the gods intended to support him as much as possible. He then asked if it was acceptable to bring the knowledge he had gained on Earth into his new world. She answered that it was completely fine, explaining that someone else had once been reincarnated while retaining all of their memories. On top of that, he would also receive a gift from all the gods. As an apology for everything that had happened, Mr. Shinomiya would be allowed to request up to 3 skills before his reincarnation. He wondered if it was really acceptable for him to receive such generous gifts. Samadhi assured him that it was. Since the incident had happened because of her own incompetence, she told him there was no reason to hold back. Even so, Shinomiya asked if he could have some time to think about his choices. Samadhi agreed without hesitation and said she would wait until he had made his decision. To help him decide, she prepared a board containing every skill that existed in the other world. A massive list of skills appeared before him. Shinomiya carefully read through the list. Before long, he glanced towards Samadhi and noticed that she had already fallen asleep with surprising ease. After finishing his selection, he informed her that he had made his choices. His first skill was Appraising Eye. This skill allowed him to obtain information by assessing objects as well as the skills of other people. If he possessed a skill that allowed him to observe more targets than appraising eye and also had the ability to block that skill, he would be able to cancel it. His second choice was Useful Box. Normally, item boxes and storage skills were limited because they could only hold a maximum number of items. Useful Box solved that problem by storing items based on categories instead of quantity. The maximum number of categories it could hold was determined by half of his MP, and aside from that restriction, there were no other limitations. Shinomiya asked Samadhi whether she thought those choices were good. She explained that she had forgotten to mention an important detail. Since skills could increase in level, he should also consider how they would grow over time when creating them. Hearing that, Shinomiya admitted that the idea of designing skills with future growth in mind was unfamiliar to him. Samadhi explained that, for an appraisal skill, increasing its level would improve the amount of information it could process. As for a storage skill, leveling it up would increase its storage capacity or provide similar improvements. Shinomiya then realized that Useful Box already seemed to have unlimited capacity, making him wonder how such a skill could continue to improve. Samadhi suggested designing it so that each time it gained a level, it would unlock an entirely new function. She considered that approach to be an excellent idea. Shinomiya then asked how those new functions would be acquired. He wondered if he could simply decide which new functions he wanted whenever the skill leveled up, and asked if it was really acceptable to determine their effects later. Samadhi explained that this would be treated as a special exception. She believed that whatever functions became necessary would naturally appear, and earnestly asked him to make good use of it. Grateful for the consideration, Shinomiya thanked her before moving on to his final choice. His third skill was Daily Life Magic. With this skill, he would be able to acquire the types of magic needed for everyday life in his new world. After looking over all of his chosen skills, Samadhi fell into deep thought. She eventually concluded that they were becoming too powerful and worried that they might upset the balance of the world. At the very least, she decided that a limitation was necessary. Shinomiya accepted her decision without objection. Since the maximum skill level was 5, they agreed that every time one of his skills increased by a level, he would learn 5 additional skills. With the preparations complete, Samadhi began using her divine power. Once the process ended, she announced that everything was ready, marking the end of their time together. Shinomiya hesitated before wondering whether they would ever have another chance to meet after he left. The thought of never seeing her again left him feeling lonely. Samadhi explained that he could save time each day by offering prayers. As long as he continued raising his faith skill, there was a possibility that they would meet again someday. Shinomiya quietly looked forward to that day. Samadhi then guided him toward the place where he would depart and wished him a fulfilling second life. When Shinomiya opened his eyes again, he wondered why he was already a child. He recalled Samadhi joking that the next time he woke up, he would be a baby. He then decided to check his status using appraising eye. Looking through it, he noticed that he still did not have a name because he had only just been reincarnated. His attention quickly shifted to the incredibly powerful skills listed before him. Although he was surprised, he reminded himself that this was not the time to be overwhelmed. Instead, he decided to examine everything one by one. He carefully read through World Language, EXP Amplification, and God's Veil. He was curious about the purpose of those special skills, but since they did not seem harmful, he accepted having them. He also noticed Semidila's protection among his abilities. It was not displayed as a numerical value like the others, leaving him wondering how it actually worked. Another thing that surprised him was the existence of titles. Among the titles he possessed were Blessed, God's Host, Reincarnated, Abandoned Child, and Nameless. Shinomiya stretched his body while organizing everything he had learned. Thanks to his high memory capacity, he had already memorized most of the skill effects, although many of the unfamiliar terms still required further understanding. Deciding to test his abilities for himself, he activated Daily Life Magic and instructed it to display the kinds of magic available for him to learn at his current stage. Information about the available spells immediately appeared before him. He wondered if he had truly learned all of them just now. As he looked through the list, he was amazed by how magic was divided into different attributes and by the sheer number of spells that existed. Shinomiya decided to test one of them. He gathered his focus, concentrated his magic, and pointed a finger forward. A small flame appeared from his fingertip. Delighted that he had genuinely managed to use magic, he jumped into the air in excitement. After that, he turned his attention to Useful Box. He opened it to see how it worked, and almost immediately noticed something waiting inside. It was a letter from Mr. Samadhi. The letter explained that there was bad news. It revealed that the wicked god who had been interfering with Mr. Shinomiya's fate had once again slipped past the heavenly realm's supervision and attempted to interfere with his reincarnation. Unfortunately, the process of reincarnating him as a baby had been disrupted, making it impossible to carry over his memories before his rebirth. As a result, it could take as long as 10 years before those memories returned. The letter also revealed that Mr. Shinomiya's unusually low luck in his previous life had been caused by that same powerful interference. Because of it, he had never been able to experience a truly fortunate life. After reading this, Shinomiya wondered if his terrible luck had also been the reason he ended up as an abandoned child. Samadhi reassured him through the letter that the problem had already been taken care of and that it would never happen again, so there was no need to worry. As another apology, additional abilities had been granted to him. However, the letter admitted that another unexpected problem had appeared. Shinomiya could not help wondering why the explanations suddenly sounded so hesitant. The letter continued by explaining that every child in that world was required to undergo a ceremony called the appraising ritual upon reaching the age of 10. During that ritual, each child's skills and special abilities would be identified. However, because Mr. Shinomiya's memories had not yet returned, none of his skills appeared during the ritual. As a result, his parents believed their son possessed no skills or special abilities. They considered him a failure and used the ritual's outcome as the perfect reason to cast him out of their home. Shinomiya found it difficult to believe. He realized that being expelled had not been caused by bad luck after all, but by Samadhi's mistake. At the same time, he understood that none of it had been done with bad intentions, leaving him with mixed feelings. He then realized that now that his memories had returned, he could finally remember the past 10 years of his new life. Perhaps those memories would provide the clues he needed. His memories began returning one after another. He remembered a large house where his mother had lovingly carried him as a baby. Before long, she fell ill and passed away. After that, he constantly heard himself being called a cursed failure and the disgrace of the family because he possessed neither skills nor special abilities. He was treated as someone completely worthless. His father had shown no desire to keep him. Bound by the family's traditions, his father had already decided that the result of the appraising ritual would not change his mind. There was no place in the family for an incompetent failure. After being driven from the house, he stood silently at the front gate before turning around and walking away, wondering what he was supposed to do next. Remembering everything, Shinomiya realized just how disastrous his situation had been. Following the road that his mother had once told him led to the capital, he continued walking alone. Eventually, his exhausted body gave out, and he suddenly collapsed. As he lay there, he thought that if anything else happened, it would simply be another hardship added to everything that had already occurred. Having walked barefoot for so long, he could no longer continue. Not long afterward, someone discovered him lying unconscious on the ground. The man kindly carried him into a carriage and even paid the carriage driver himself. Shinomiya wondered if the silver-haired man had been the one who saved him. Looking back at the letter once more, he found another clue. It instructed him to visit the Adventurers Guild and hand the letter to the receptionist with the scar on his face. The mention of the Adventurers Guild immediately reminded Shinomiya of the fantasy stories he had read so often in his previous life. It felt like the noble path followed by many heroes. Even though he still feared the unfamiliar world around him, he decided to head there. Shinomiya wandered through the streets, quietly wondering why he felt such excitement despite everything that had happened. He stopped at several shops to ask for directions to the guild, and someone kindly pointed him toward the kingdom headquarters of the Adventurers Guild located in the capital. When he finally arrived, he was amazed by the number of strong-looking adventurers gathered inside. He then remembered that he needed to search for someone with a scar on his face. Thinking that the reception desk nearby looked unoccupied, he cautiously made his way toward it, intending to ask for assistance. However, the moment he looked up, the scarred man fixed him with a cold stare. Shinomiya immediately felt that he had encountered someone intimidating from the very beginning, leaving him wondering what would happen next. At the headquarters of the Adventurers Guild in the capital of the Recomedies Kingdom, Shinomiya noticed a man with a serious expression standing behind one of the reception desks. Remembering that he had been searching for someone with a scar on his face, he wondered if this was the person mentioned in the letter. He also questioned whether it was truly a reception desk, since no one else was standing beside the man. Even so, he decided that he should approach him. Shinomiya walked up to the desk and asked if it was the reception counter. The man looked at him before confirming that it was. Relieved, Shinomiya admitted that he was glad because he would not have known what to do if he had approached the wrong place. The people nearby immediately began whispering among themselves, surprised that a child had the courage to approach that man. Hearing the murmurs around him, the man asked Shinomiya whether he was not afraid of him. Shinomiya paused for a moment before admitting that he did not feel particularly afraid. He simply thought the man looked a little intimidating. He then explained that he had a letter he wanted to hand over. The man accepted the letter with a puzzled look and began reading it. His expression changed as if he recognized something. Seeing that reaction, Shinomiya wondered whether the man was acquainted with the sender, but the man dismissed the thought, indicating that he had only been talking to himself. After finishing the letter, the man asked Shinomiya if he had any other business there. Shinomiya tried to think of an answer but realized that he had never planned what to do after delivering the letter. Seeing him hesitate, the man suggested that perhaps he wanted to make a request or register as an adventurer. The mention of becoming an adventurer immediately caught Shinomiya's attention. This was a fantasy world, and since he could already use magic, he felt that it was worth trying. With confidence, Shinomiya declared that he had come to become an adventurer. The man explained that there were no special restrictions other than passing a test. As Shinomiya's excitement grew, the man asked whether he had enough money to pay the registration fee. Shinomiya asked what amount was required. The man explained that the fee was 1 silver coin. He added that he could make an exception and let Shinomiya pay later if necessary. Feeling nervous, Shinomiya searched through his belongings. The man's gaze remained fixed on him, making him even more aware of the situation. A moment later, Shinomiya found several coins and showed them, asking if they were enough. He wondered if the silver-haired man who had rescued him had placed them there. The man confirmed that the payment was sufficient before handing him a form. He instructed Shinomiya to bring it with him and follow. As they walked downstairs, the man remembered that they had not introduced themselves. He introduced himself as Goldo before asking for Shinomiya's name. Shinomiya remembered that he was still officially nameless, so he answered with the name Lurku. It was a name he had often used for his video game characters in his previous life. Goldo commented that it was a good name, and Lurku simply laughed. After they sat down, Lurku informed Goldo that he had finished filling out the form. Goldo carefully reviewed his answers. Nothing had been left blank. He had listed his preferred weapon as a dagger, his swordsmanship skill, and his fire attribute magic. Lurku demonstrated his fire magic and explained that he had not practiced it very much yet, but he was able to use it to some extent. Goldo found that acceptable and proceeded to explain the examination. The test itself was simple. Lurku needed to attack a measuring dummy using both his weapon and his magic. Curious, Lurku asked what would happen after striking it. Goldo pointed to the plate attached to the dummy's body and explained that the power behind each attack would be converted into a numerical score that would appear on the plate. Lurku acknowledged the explanation, and Goldo continued by informing him that the time limit was 1 hour and that the passing score was 300 points. After wishing him good luck, Goldo stepped back. Feeling motivated, Lurku decided to test the waters first. He launched a fire spell at the dummy, and the plate displayed a score of 101. Realizing he needed to nearly triple that amount, he immediately tried again, pouring more effort into his magic. He wondered whether it would work as he fired another attack, but the result fell short of what he needed. It was nowhere near enough. Although he felt a little stressed, he quickly encouraged himself by remembering that there was still plenty of time left. Lurku tried again, raising the score to 122, but it was still not enough. He launched another attack, and the number increased even further, yet he still had not reached the passing mark. He continued attempting it over and over until all his strength faded, causing him to collapse onto the ground. Goldo checked on him, asking if he was all right. Lurku assured him that he was. As he caught his breath, he noticed that his score had been increasing little by little and began wondering why. He then remembered the description of a praising eye. It allowed him to see that his ability to control magic had improved, increasing both its accuracy and power. He also noticed that the levels of his MP and fire attribute magic had increased, and it appeared that he had even learned a new skill. Letting out a sigh, he felt a small sense of hope return. Lurku gathered himself and first created a small flame. He then used his newly acquired skill, magic control, to increase both its power and its accuracy. As he carefully shaped the magic, Goldo watched him closely from the side. Completely focused, Lurku released the strengthened flame toward the measuring dummy. The plate displayed a score of 324. Goldo was genuinely surprised by the result. Lurku stood there breathing heavily. Just as he was about to celebrate passing the test, his exhausted body gave out, and everything went black. When Lurku opened his eyes again, he found himself lying in a bed. Goldo was there waiting and noted that he had finally regained consciousness. He explained that Lurku had collapsed because of a combination of excessive magic use and malnutrition before asking how he was feeling. Lurku replied that he was fine and apologized for causing so much trouble. His thoughts immediately turned to the examination, and he asked about the result. Goldo reassured him that he had passed the test. The news filled Lurku with relief and happiness. However, Goldo reminded him that taking care of his health was also part of an adventurer's responsibility. Lurku apologized once more and admitted that he had not eaten anything since arriving in the capital. Just as Goldo was about to invite him to eat, Lurku's stomach let out a loud growl. Seeing that, Goldo decided they should get him something to eat first. Since Lurku was still a child, he told him to act like one. Goldo asked him to get ready and checked whether he would be alright eating at the guild's cafeteria. Lurku apologized again and admitted that he could not thank Goldo enough for all of his kindness. He then got dressed and straightened his clothes. Before leaving, Lurku happened to look into a mirror. Curious, he reached up and touched his face. It was the first time he had truly seen his appearance in this new world. He wondered if this was really the version of himself that belonged there. His hair was silver, and even his facial features were completely different from those of his previous life. Looking at his reflection, he could not help feeling impressed, proudly thinking that he looked quite handsome. Goldo called out to him, wondering what was taking so long since he was being left behind. He found it strange that Laruku seemed so absorbed in admiring his own face. The two of them headed to the guild's cafeteria. Before long, their meal was served, along with an apology for making them wait. Laruku was amazed by the food placed before him. Goldo thanked the man who had brought it over. The man was surprised that Goldo had brought a child with him. He then introduced himself as Fritz, the manager of the Adventurers Guild cafeteria, and greeted Laruku. They shook hands, and Laruku introduced himself as well, pleased to meet him. Fritz remarked that Laruku must have had plenty of courage because Goldo's appearance usually frightened people. Laruku disagreed. While he admitted that Goldo did look intimidating, he believed that Goldo was actually a very kind person. In fact, he thought Goldo might be the kindest person in the entire capital. The compliment left Goldo embarrassed, while Fritz reacted as though that was exactly what he had expected. Goldo lightly tapped Fritz, reminding him that it was time to return to work. Fritz agreed before telling Laruku to get along well with Goldo. He finished by giving Laruku a playful wink, which only irritated Goldo and prompted him to chase Fritz away. After Fritz left, Goldo complained that he enjoyed joking around far too much. He advised Laruku not to take anything Fritz said too seriously. Laruku agreed before finally tasting the meal. The food exceeded his expectations, and he was amazed by how delicious it was. As Laruku continued eating, Goldo remembered that there was something he needed to give him. He asked if it was a good time, and Laruku assured him that he could continue talking without worrying about interrupting his meal. Goldo then presented him with a necklace. He explained that it would serve as proof of Laruku's membership in the Adventurers Guild. It could also be used as an identification card whenever he traveled to another country. To complete his personal registration, Goldo explained that Laruku needed to imprint his information onto a metal plate. All it required was a single drop of blood, which could be obtained with a small prick from the provided needle. Laruku was surprised by it, and when Goldo simply placed it on his finger, Laruku became nervous and started trembling, wondering if everything was already finished. Goldo let him know that it was not over yet. A drop of Laruku's blood then fell onto the necklace. He explained that once the name was engraved onto it, the registration would be complete. Laruku wondered if the plate would change its color, and Goldo nodded after thinking about it. He explained that adventurers were ranked using a 5-level grading system from A to E. The plate's color changed according to rank. Copper represented ranks E to D, silver represented ranks C to B, and gold was reserved for the strongest adventurers at rank I. Laruku remembered that the silver-haired person who had once saved his life carried a silver plate. That meant the man had been an adventurer. Goldo then pointed out that it was already getting late and said that Laruku should spend some time at the doctor's office so there would be no need to worry if something happened to him. Laruku thanked him before heading back. The following morning, Laruku returned to the guild. As he looked at Goldo's face, he thought it already looked quite intimidating and wondered what he was supposed to do if the guild master looked even scarier. Goldo directed him to the guild master's room. Unsure if he had reached the right place, Laruku knocked on the door and excused himself before entering. As the door opened, he found Goldo already inside together with 2 women. Goldo welcomed him, mentioning that he had been waiting for him, and Laruku greeted everyone with a good morning. One of the women laughed after seeing Laruku casually speaking to Goldo, finding it genuinely surprising, and turned to Lala for agreement. Lala instead pointed out that greeting the child properly should have come first. The women introduced themselves. The deputy guildmaster was Lalatina, while the person beside her was the guildmaster, Leafia. Leafia insisted that everyone simply call her Fa, while Lalatina could be called Lala. Faye invited Laruku to sit wherever he liked and asked Lala to prepare some coffee. Lala replied that she would brew it right away. They all took their seats, with Goldo sitting beside Laruku, who smiled at everyone. Fia watched the scene with delight and excitedly pointed out how Laruku was staying close to Goldo, but Lala quickly stopped her from making too much of it. Laruku then asked why he had been called there. Goldo explained that something unusual had happened during Laruku's adventurer registration. Then he asked Laruku whether he had any family. Laruku shared that he had recently been expelled from his home and was now completely alone. Goldo silently realized that his guess had been correct. Fia gently mentioned that Laruku did not have to answer if the topic was painful, but she still asked why he had been cast out. Laruku explained that he had been treated as a failure because no skills appeared during the appraisal ritual. Goldo was startled because Laruku had clearly used magic the previous day. He believed it had something to do with Laruku's special ability. Everyone in the room was left stunned after hearing about that special ability. Laruku possessed an ability that completely nullified every form of appraisal magic, which was why none of his skills had appeared during the ritual. Everyone remained shocked by the revelation. Lala then thought of something and asked if she could personally use her appraisal magic on him. She immediately cast the spell while Fia explained that Lala's appraisal magic was far more advanced than the one normally used during the appraisal ritual. Goldo finally understood the situation. After completing the appraisal, Lala confirmed that nothing appeared at all. Fia remarked that even Lala was unable to see anything, showing just how remarkable Laruku's ability truly was. Laruku thanked her and asked if that was everything they wanted from him. Fia confirmed that it was, explaining that they had only wanted to learn about his background. She then reminded Goldo to make sure he brought Laruku down there. Goldo answered that he already knew, then told Laruku that it was time to go. Fia waved goodbye, hoping they could spend time together again someday, and Laruku waved back before leaving. As they headed downstairs, Laruku asked Goldo where they were going. Goldo only replied that he would understand soon enough. They eventually stopped in front of a door, and Goldo told him that they had arrived. Laruku wondered if it was a warehouse. Goldo explained that many adventurers return from their quests carrying all kinds of gathered materials. Since Laruku was still new, his first assignment would be sorting those materials. Laruku asked if that meant cleaning up the warehouse because he would gladly help with that work. Goldo replied that it would be a great help, especially since the amount of materials waiting inside was already far beyond what he could manage alone. Basically, adventurers receive rewards by completing requests issued by individuals or groups. The guild serves as an institution that supports adventurers and provides them with various facilities. After registering with the guild, adventurers gain many benefits, just as Mr. Goldo had explained to Laruku the previous night. As Laruku accepted his very first request, he had no time to get carried away by his hopes and expectations. Goldo told him that having him there was a huge help. Laruku looked at the object he was holding for a moment before deciding to stop thinking about one particular person. There was simply no way that only two people could handle such a massive amount of work by themselves. Laruku promised that he would do his best, and Goldo encouraged him, feeling pleased by his determination. The two of them worked together to organize and clean the materials. After some time, Goldo admitted that the job was difficult even with two people. Laruku complained that they had barely made any progress. He let out a frustrated groan, realizing that the work would never end if they continued at that pace. Then an idea suddenly came to him. He thought about using his useful box skill and decided to test it by pointing his hand toward one of the boxes. Laruku activated the useful box and stored it away. Just as he had expected, it worked perfectly. At that moment, he completely understood how the ability functioned. The useful box allowed him to move items in and out within a 5-meter range. Everything stored inside was automatically organized, and it remained neatly arranged even after being taken back out. If he continued repeating the same process, the entire task could be completed with ease. Goldo became curious when he noticed how quickly the work was progressing. He was surprised to find that everything had already been neatly organized. Laruku informed him that he was almost finished. Goldo was stunned and wondered where the enormous pile of items had gone. Laruku explained that he possessed a storage-type skill, so he had simply used it. Goldo realized that Laruku possessed yet another rare ability. He thanked him and suggested finishing everything as quickly as possible. After that, he told Laruku that they should head to the next room. Laruku agreed without hesitation, only to suddenly stop after realizing something was wrong. Goldo then informed Laruku that there were still 3 more rooms waiting to be cleaned. He laughed as he gently ruffled Laruku's hair, telling him once again that he had truly been a great help. By that point, Laruku was already exhausted from all the cleaning. Goldo mentioned that he would report to the guild master that they had finished, and Laruku nodded in agreement. Even though he had relied on his skill, he was still worn out from the work. At the same time, he could not help wondering what would have happened if he had not possessed those abilities. As Laruku ran downstairs, someone called out to him. It was Miss Fia, who immediately grabbed his arm. She mentioned that Goldo had told her about his ability and asked whether he could store a silver coin using his skill. Fia happily held out the coin, and Laruku activated his magic, storing it away. She was amazed that he had managed to store the coin without even touching it. Overcome with excitement, she hugged Laruku tightly and squeezed him. Laruku struggled for air and felt as though he could barely breathe. Goldo stepped in and stopped her, deciding that it was enough. Even though Fia still wanted to hug him again, Goldo held her back while Lala asked her to calm down. Fia admitted that she simply could not help herself because she had never seen a skill like that before. She turned to Lala for agreement, and Lala admitted that she was right. Tempted once again, Fia tried to approach Laruku another time, but Lala quickly struck her to stop her. Lala apologized, explaining that Fia would never calm down whenever she became interested in someone's skills. She then told Goldo that they should leave for the day and apologized again, explaining that Fia was normally very gentle. However, whenever she encountered a rare skill or a magical item, she completely lost control. Laruku laughed softly, thinking that it certainly seemed that way. Goldo then remembered something and asked Laruku if he was free at the moment. He was thinking about showing him around the capital. Laruku paused for a moment before agreeing, wondering if it would really be alright because he would be happy to go. Laruku and Goldo spent time walking around the capital, visiting several shops along the way. Goldo pointed out that Laruku could not keep wearing the same clothes forever and commented that the new outfit suited him well. Laruku was happy with the clothes he had chosen. When Goldo asked the shopkeeper for the price, Laruku quickly insisted on paying for them himself. Goldo refused, telling him that there was no need to hold back. Laruku apologized because he would feel terrible if he accepted even more help. Goldo explained that he was doing it for his own reasons, so Laruku had no reason to feel guilty. Laruku still believed there was a reason to feel that way, making Goldo realize how surprisingly stubborn he was. Laruku let out a small laugh, thinking that Goldo was just as stubborn. Even so, Goldo reminded him not to hesitate to tell him if he ever needed anything. As they continued looking around the city, a woman noticed Goldo and was surprised to see that he was not on duty. Soon after, another man recognized him and remarked that it had been a long time. Before long, more people gathered around Goldo, crowding him from every direction as they tried to speak with him. The people pushed against one another until Laruku was caught in the middle and ended up getting squeezed by the crowd. He tried to call out to Goldo. After noticing him, Goldo checked to see if Laruku's cheek was alright, explaining that no one had meant to hurt him. Laruku assured him that he was fine and gently rubbed his cheek. He admitted that he never realized Goldo was so popular among the people of the city. Goldo seemed surprised by the thought because he hardly spoke to anyone at the guild anymore. After receiving the large scar on his face, he believed he looked far more frightening than before, and because of that, he had become used to spending most of his time alone. Just as Laruku was about to ask about the scar, Goldo informed him that they had arrived at their destination. Goldo apologized for getting distracted and turned his attention to the building in front of them. Laruku assured him that it was not a problem. They both looked at the place, hoping there was still a spare room available. Goldo rang the bell, and someone inside noticed that they had finally arrived. The door opened, and Goldo greeted the man. The man already knew he was coming. After patting Goldo on the shoulder, he explained that his older brother had visited the previous day and informed him that Goldo would be bringing a child named Laruku, so he had already prepared a room. Goldo realized that the person was talking about Fritz. The man then turned his attention to Laruku and confirmed that he was the child he had heard about. He introduced himself as Dats, the owner of the Small Bear Lodging and the younger brother of Fritz, the manager of the guild cafeteria. Laruku greeted him politely, and Dats praised him for being such a well-mannered child. He then asked how long Laruku planned to stay. Goldo requested a 1-month stay for the time being, including breakfast and lunch, and Dats agreed without hesitation. Hearing that, Laruku's eyes filled with tears as he quickly stopped them, worrying about the cost of paying for an entire month. The others paused for a moment before Dats suddenly laughed, leaving Laruku confused. Dats explained that Goldo was the very reason his business was still able to survive in the city. To him, Goldo was someone who protected the city, which was why he allowed Goldo and anyone accompanying him to stay at the inn free of charge without any conditions. Goldo gave a small nudge in response, pointing out that he hardly ever stayed there himself. Laruku quietly looked at him, becoming even more curious about how someone could be regarded as the city's savior. Dats then called for Imelda and asked whether she was alright with the arrangement as well. Imelda immediately agreed, explaining that she could never refuse a request from Mr. Goldo. She introduced herself as Dats' wife and warmly greeted Laruku. Laruku thanked her and gratefully accepted her kindness. Imelda invited him to have lunch since the meal would be ready very soon. She instructed him to bring his luggage to his room first and then come straight to the cafeteria afterward. Goldo mentioned that he needed to return to the guild. Before leaving, he told Dats and Imelda that he was counting on them, then reminded Laruku not to forget to come back to the guild the following day. Goldo waved goodbye, and Laruku sincerely thanked him for everything he had done that day. The next morning, Laruku woke up and spent some time experimenting with his magic. As he got ready for the day, he decided to use his powers while taking a bath. The experience felt refreshing. He created a simple shower using his water magic, and to his surprise, it worked quite well. Even so, he still hoped that one day he would be able to use a real shower. Afterward, Laruku checked his status. He noticed that his strength had increased slightly and that he had gained a new form of protection. That made him wonder if another god had decided to lend him their power. Looking at his clothes, Laruku began thinking about how he was supposed to wash them without a washing machine. Before long, an idea came to mind. He used his wind magic to make the water spin, then added soap into the mix. Just as he expected, it worked like a small washing machine. After that, he used his skill to replace the dirty water with clean water. Once everything was finished, Laruku went upstairs and hung his clothes out to dry. At that moment, he truly felt that magic was the most useful thing he could have. After getting ready, Laruku headed to the cafeteria and had a sandwich for breakfast. As he enjoyed his meal, he thought that having a proper meal every day was a true blessing. While he was happily eating, a small girl approached him and asked if he was Laruku. She mentioned that he looked about the same age as her before introducing herself as Anna. Laruku politely greeted her and addressed her as Miss Anna. Anna immediately puffed out her cheeks and made it clear that she did not want to be called Miss Anna. Instead, she wanted him to speak to her more casually and simply call her Anna. Laruku repeated her name, which made Anna smile with satisfaction. A voice suddenly called out to Anna from nearby. It was Imelda, reminding her that she would be late for school. Anna immediately realized she had forgotten about the time. She hurried off while waving goodbye to Laruku, hoping they would meet again later. After Anna left, Imelda apologized for the commotion. She explained that Anna was her daughter and hoped that Laruku would become good friends with her. Laruku gladly agreed, thinking that Anna was a very lovely girl. Once he finished eating, Laruku let out a satisfied sigh, having truly enjoyed the meal. As he stood up, he noticed 3 men staring at him. One of them called him over, wanting to ask him something. They paused for a moment before suddenly becoming emotional, wondering how anyone could abandon such a good child and believing that his parents must have been cruel. Another man asked if Laruku was staying with Mr. Goldo. He encouraged Laruku not to hesitate if there was ever anything he wanted to ask for. Just then, Dats walked over and jokingly remarked that Laruku had already become quite popular. Laruku wondered if he had done something unusual. Dats explained that everyone was simply happy because Laruku spoke to them so naturally. Adventurers with rough appearances were often misunderstood because of the way they looked. Dats looked toward the others, and they all nodded in agreement. One of the men then asked Laruku if he had any plans afterward. Laruku replied that he intended to visit the guild. The man suggested that he come along with them since they also had something to deliver there. Laruku agreed before asking why everyone seemed to avoid using Mr. Goldo's reception desk. The man scratched the back of his neck and hesitated for a moment before explaining that there was a reason for it. 10 years earlier, a dragon had attacked the city. Unfortunately, at that same time, a labyrinth had been discovered far away from the capital. Nearly every adventurer, from experienced veterans to complete beginners, had already left to investigate it. Goldo was the only adventurer left behind in the city. He fought the dragon with everything he had and eventually defeated it, saving the city from complete destruction. However, the victory came at a heavy cost. He lost his right eye and his left leg during the battle. By the time the adventurers who had gone to the labyrinth returned, everything had already ended. The man admitted that he knew Goldo was not the type of person to blame anyone, but the guilt still remained. Whenever he thought that their presence might have saved Goldo and prevented him from losing his career as an adventurer, he could not help feeling worse. Hearing this story, Laruku finally understood why the people of the city treated Goldo with such kindness and respect. It became clear to him that Mr. Goldo truly was an amazing person. Laruku then asked why adventurers from outside the city did not treat him the same way. The man answered that the reason was obvious. Most people only noticed Goldo's frightening appearance. Laruku quietly thought that it was a sad reality. Laruku went to the guild as Goldo had instructed, but he could not find him anywhere. Suddenly, someone quietly whispered his name. The voice called him again and signaled for him to come closer while warning him to move quietly. Laruku was relieved to see that it was Goldo, but Goldo immediately urged him to stay silent. As Laruku was about to speak, Goldo carefully led him into a room and gently closed the door behind them. He looked around to make sure no one was nearby. Laruku noticed how cautious he was and wondered what was going on. Goldo then revealed a bag filled with silver coins. Laruku was amazed by the large amount inside. Goldo handed the bag to him and told him to take it, leaving Laruku completely stunned. The surprise made him raise his voice, and Goldo quickly scolded him for being too loud. Laruku immediately returned the bag, refusing to accept it because he could not take such a large amount without knowing the reason behind it. Goldo explained that it was the reward for sorting the warehouse the previous day. Laruku could hardly believe that the payment was really that much. Goldo explained that the guild normally assigned that request to newly registered adventurers and expected them to spend several days completing it. Laruku, however, had finished the entire job by himself in a single day, so every coin in the reward rightfully belonged to him. Goldo admitted that it might seem like a huge amount to a beginner, but a high-ranking adventurer could easily earn the same amount in a single day. Because of that, it was not considered an especially large reward. Laruku pointed out that if people discovered a newcomer had received such a generous payment, it would certainly cause an uproar. For that reason, he believed it would be best to keep it a secret. Goldo agreed that he was right. He then mentioned something else. The person who had once saved Laruku happened to be an acquaintance of his, leaving Laruku surprised. Although it had happened a long time ago, Laruku was happy that he finally had the chance to ask about the person who had saved his life. Goldo explained that he had once been asked to train Laruku as an adventurer if someone ever came to him carrying a letter from Laruku's savior and showed enough potential. Laruku finally understood why Goldo had gone to such great lengths to take care of him when the reason had remained a mystery for so long. Goldo confirmed that the request had indeed been made, but admitted that he also chose to help because he genuinely wanted to. He believed that Laruku possessed a great deal of potential. Hearing those words made Laruku blush as he thanked him. Curious to know more, Laruku asked what kind of person his savior was. Goldo paused to think before describing him. He explained that the man was not a bad person, but he tended to keep his distance from others. After setting out several years earlier to resolve some personal matters, he had never returned. Goldo apologized and suggested leaving the topic for another day, and Laruku accepted that. Although he remained curious about his savior's past, it was clear that the subject was difficult for Goldo to discuss, so he decided to wait until the time was right. Feeling that words alone were not enough, Goldo pulled back a curtain and revealed a collection of different weapons. He invited Laruku to choose whichever weapon he liked and promised to train him thoroughly. Laruku asked if it was really alright for him to choose freely. As he looked over the weapons, he found it difficult to decide. Then he remembered that he possessed the short swordsmanship skill, so he chose a short sword. The training soon began, and before long, they had already reached the 4th day of practice. The sound of clashing swords echoed as they exchanged blows. Goldo noticed that Laruku had improved remarkably in such a short period of time. Determined to land at least a single hit, Laruku gathered all of his remaining strength and threw everything into one final attack. Afterward, he stood there panting heavily, frustrated that he had not managed to leave even the slightest scratch on Goldo. Goldo simply laughed, believing that Laruku had performed well for his very first mock battle. He admitted that although he had lost one of his legs, his skills had not declined enough to be defeated by a rookie. Even so, Goldo felt that it was unfortunate that someone with as much potential as Laruku had been judged as incompetent and cast out of his home. He then asked Laruku how he had realized that he possessed skills. Laruku immediately thought that he could not reveal the truth. Memories from his past suddenly resurfaced in his mind, and as painful as it was, he believed his only option was to pretend he knew nothing. He explained that after being thrown out of his home, he had been looking at an unfamiliar fruit when something resembling a screen suddenly appeared before him. From that moment, he realized that he possessed an appraisal skill. Goldo paused after hearing that before reacting with surprise. The thought of Laruku possessing an appraisal skill made him realize that he could also become a successful merchant if he wanted to. Laruku, however, admitted that he still preferred becoming an adventurer instead. Goldo then mentioned that the guild master would be teaching him magic after that. Laruku wondered if it would be Fia. Goldo confirmed that it would be. Although she might not seem like it at first glance, her ability with magic was considered among the finest in the entire country. He reminded Laruku to study diligently under her guidance. Laruku soon arrived at Fia's room, where she prepared to begin the lesson. Before starting, however, she asked him to tell her what magic attributes he possessed. Laruku answered that he had 10 different attributes: fire, wind, water, earth, light, darkness, lightning, ice, holy, and void magic. Fia smiled at first, asking him to repeat what he had just said. Laruku began listing them again, starting with fire and wind, but Fia quickly stopped him, saying she had already heard enough and did not need to hear the rest. Confused, Laruku asked whether having that many attributes was considered a lot or very little. Fia immediately made it clear that it was an extraordinary amount. She then asked whether he even knew how many magic attributes existed in the world. Laruku admitted that he did not because he had never read books about magic and had never been given the chance to learn from anyone. Fia thought quietly for a moment before making a decision. She concluded that magic training should be postponed for the time being. Instead, she would first teach him the common knowledge of the world so he would not face the same kind of problems again. From that day forward, Laruku would train with Goldo every morning and study under Fia every afternoon. Another day of exhausting work awaited Laruku after completing his morning training. As he rested, someone pulled out a chair and sat down in front of him before greeting him. Laruku greeted the man in return and politely asked who he was. The man hesitated just before introducing himself. Instead of giving his name, he simply described himself as a friend of Goldo. Laruku found the sudden pause a little strange. Believing the man had come to see Goldo, Laruku apologized and explained that Goldo was currently busy with work. The man pointed directly at Laruku instead, making it clear that Laruku was actually the person he had come to meet. Laruku quietly stared at him while noticing that the people nearby kept glancing in his direction. He could not help wondering why everyone seemed unwilling to meet the man's eyes. Just then, Goldo suddenly arrived and called out to Laruku. Laruku was about to greet him, but he immediately noticed the man and was surprised to see him there. The man reacted to Laruku's surprised response before explaining that he had come because he had heard an interesting rumor and wanted to satisfy his curiosity. Goldo immediately became nervous and hurriedly gathered the two of them together. He excused himself to Fia, who wondered what had happened. At that moment, the man openly revealed himself. The sight of him immediately caused Fia's expression to fill with disgust. She quickly realized who he was and let out a quiet sigh. Fia understood that things would become troublesome if word reached him, so she had chosen to remain silent until then. The The man casually greeted her after such a long time apart, reminding her that he had always wanted to be informed whenever something interesting happened. Laruku quietly whispered to Goldo, asking whether that man was Fia's disciple. Goldo confirmed that he was indeed her disciple, but also revealed that he was actually the king of the country. The revelation left Laruku even more shocked, making him wonder whether it was really acceptable for a king to casually go on playful outings like that, though it quickly became clear that his behavior had little to do with his position. The man realized that he had not properly introduced himself. He revealed that his name was Ars Recomedies. Although he was technically the king, he explained that since he was outside the castle, Laruku could simply call him Ars. Laruku politely introduced himself in return. Just then, Goldo struck Ars, causing him to cry out in pain. Goldo immediately asked whether Her Highness Queen Emma knew everything about what he was doing. Ars avoided answering and began sweating nervously, which was enough for Goldo to understand the situation. Ars tried to defend himself by insisting that he had been properly handling his duties not long before. Unconvinced, Goldo asked the guildmaster to send him back to the castle. Fia understood immediately. She grabbed hold of Ars and activated her teleportation magic. A bright light surrounded them, and just before they vanished, Ars desperately begged for anyone except Emma. His voice continued echoing even after they disappeared. After they were gone, Goldo remarked that Ars was truly a handful. He explained that Ars excelled in both magic and swordsmanship, along with many other fields. He was an unmatched genius, but unfortunately his personality was deeply flawed. Ars only devoted his attention to things that genuinely interested him. Because of that, he frequently neglected his own responsibilities and instead involved himself in other people's affairs. Shortly afterward, Fia returned, looking exhausted after dealing with him. With everything finally settled, Laruku suggested ending the day there. The following morning, Laruku noticed an envelope resting on his table. Without wasting any time, he brought it to Goldo and explained that he had found it there as soon as he woke up. After looking at it, Goldo reacted with frustration, commenting that the sender had wasted an official royal seal on such a foolish letter. The message instructed Laruku to come to the castle and bring Goldo along as well. Curious, Laruku asked what the seal meant. Goldo pointed it out and explained that it contained magic imbued by the royal family. Ignoring a letter bearing that seal would be treated as disobeying a direct royal order. If that happened, the castle guards would be sent to bring the recipient in by force. Goldo admitted that this kind of situation had always happened whenever Ars was involved. Laruku realized just how much trouble Ars had caused him over the years. Goldo was convinced that there was a 9 out of 10 chance the situation would become troublesome once again. Even so, there was no avoiding it, so the two of them prepared to head for the castle. Laruku and Goldo made their way to the castle. As soon as Laruku saw it, he was amazed by its enormous size. Goldo agreed with his reaction, explaining that even when compared with the castles of other countries, this one stood in a league of its own. He went on to explain that shortly after Ars was crowned king, he had used the fortune he had earned himself to expand the castle, insisting that a bigger castle was simply better. Surprised, Laruku asked whether the king had really earned all that money on his own. Goldo confirmed that he had. Before becoming king, Ars had originally been an adventurer. Although adventuring had only been part of his training, he had climbed through the ranks at an incredible speed, completed countless quests, and built up an enormous fortune. Laruku admitted that he still could not picture Ars as a king. Goldo agreed completely, recalling that when he first met Ars, he had also questioned whether someone like him could truly be royalty. After entering the castle, a maid greeted them and guided them through the halls. She knocked on a door and informed His Majesty that his friends had arrived to see him. A response came from inside, asking them to wait for a moment. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound echoed through the room. Goldo immediately threw the door open and rushed inside to check whether Ars was all right. Papers and letters were scattered all over the room. When Ars noticed them, he happily welcomed them with a cheerful greeting and expressed how glad he was that they had come. It quickly became clear that Ars was trapped beneath a mountain of documents. Goldo angrily walked over and scolded him, reminding him that Ars had even used the royal seal to summon them despite knowing perfectly well that it was supposed to be reserved only for important matters. Unable to move from beneath the pile, Ars complained that it was unfair to be scolded while he was stuck like that. Goldo pulled him free from the documents. Ars admitted that they probably would not have come if he had not used the seal. Goldo paused for a moment before deciding that he was leaving anyway. Ars immediately stopped him, reminding him that the reason he had summoned them was something directly related to Laruku. Hearing that, Goldo had no choice but to stay. Goldo remarked that Ars should have explained that reason from the beginning. Ars then turned his attention to Laruku and asked whether he had truly been expelled from his home. Goldo immediately became irritated and questioned what Ars was trying to do, but Laruku stopped him before things escalated. Laruku calmly confirmed that it was true. He also revealed that, besides carrying the title of abandoned child, he had been given the title of nameless. Hearing that, Ars realized that even Laruku's name had been taken away, causing him to clench his hand in anger. He apologized to Laruku for bringing back such painful memories before gently placing a hand on his head. Laruku assured him that it was all right. Ars then picked up an envelope and handed it to him. Inside was a death certificate that had been sent by a certain noble. According to the document, a child had supposedly died after being attacked by a horde of monsters in the forest. Laruku tried to understand what that meant, so Ars explained that what had caught his attention was the identity of the sender. He then asked Laruku who his former parents were, because he feared that the document in front of them might actually be Laruku's own death certificate. Ars believed that the document was most likely Laruku's own death certificate. Laruku remained silent as he stared at the paper in front of him. Seeing his reaction, Goldo became furious, unable to understand how anyone could claim Laruku was dead when he was standing right there. Ars explained that he could not ignore how perfectly the description in the report matched Laruku. The document described the deceased as a gray-haired boy known for his incompetence. The moment Laruku heard those details, he recognized exactly who had sent it. He admitted that the people who had submitted the death report were undoubtedly his former parents. Ars listened carefully, but there was still one detail that continued to bother him. Goldo immediately realized that it was the part describing Laruku as incompetent. Ars explained that he had already heard from his master that Laruku was a talented adventurer with remarkable potential. Only a few days earlier he had also received a report from the spy he had assigned to quietly watch over Laruku, informing him that Laruku had even been practicing magic. Because of that, Ars wanted to understand how everything fit together. Goldo seriously asked why Ars wanted to know in the first place. The room fell silent for a brief moment. Then Ars's expression softened as he explained that it was nothing especially important. He had simply been curious how someone who had been exiled for supposedly having no skills was now capable of using magic. Goldo looked at him in disbelief before letting out a tired sigh. He then apologized to Laruku and asked whether he would be willing to explain everything. Laruku agreed and began telling the story. After hearing the explanation, Ars became genuinely interested. He remarked that the God's Veil, with its camouflage effect, was considered one of the highest-class special abilities and stood out even among other rare powers. He admitted that he was deeply impressed. Laruku explained that when he had first been exiled, he truly believed that disaster had fallen upon him. However, after experiencing how enjoyable his life had become since then, he had actually come to feel grateful that it happened. Ars simply smiled after hearing those words. Once the conversation had ended, Goldo stood up and announced that if Ars had finished his business with them, they would be leaving. Ars immediately stopped him, pointing out that it had been a long time since Goldo had visited the castle. He suggested that Goldo spend the night there unless he had other matters to attend to. Goldo explained that he still needed to escort Laruku back to the inn afterward. Ars quickly proposed that Laruku simply stay at the castle as well. Suspicious of the suggestion, Goldo asked what Ars was really trying to accomplish. Ars paused briefly before admitting the truth. The previous day he had gone to the guild, and because of that, Emma had become angry with him. He believed that inviting guests to stay over might help calm her anger. Goldo immediately refused and declared that they were leaving. Ars hurriedly stopped them once again, pleading with them to think of it as helping a friend. Goldo only looked even more irritated. Curious, Laruku asked what kind of person Miss Emma was. Goldo explained that she was Ars's wife and, in other words, the queen. When it came to his wife, she was the only person Ars could never overcome. Without another word, Goldo grabbed Ars and tossed him aside before walking away. Ars continued calling after them, asking them not to leave like that, but the two simply exited the room and closed the door behind them. As they walked outside, Goldo still could not stop thinking about the fact that someone had issued Laruku's death certificate. He believed Laruku had every right to be angry. Laruku remained silent for a moment before quietly telling Goldo that seeing him become angry on his behalf was already more than enough. Goldo gently ruffled Laruku's hair. Just then, someone called out to them in a friendly manner. It was Ars once again. He apologized to both of them before declaring that, since things had reached this point, he would simply have to use force. He immediately ordered the castle guards to take their positions. Goldo became furious and cursed Ars for what he was doing. Ars calmly replied that Goldo could call him whatever he wanted, but he had already decided that Laruku would be staying at the castle no matter what. Ars suddenly launched an attack using his magic. Goldo immediately ordered Laruku to get down. Ice magic rushed toward them as Goldo shouted at the castle guards, demanding to know why they were allowing Ars to rampage like that when they should normally be stopping him. One of the guards apologized and explained that they had been given direct royal orders not to interfere, making the situation beyond their authority. Ars suddenly dashed forward with incredible speed. Watching him charge, Goldo could not help remarking to himself that Ars abused his authority far too often over completely foolish matters. Goldo immediately drew his sword and blocked Ars's attack, causing their blades to collide with a sharp clash. Without taking his eyes off Ars, Goldo instructed Laruku to cover his ears, and Laruku quickly obeyed. Goldo then took a deep breath, leaned close to Ars's face, and unleashed an extremely powerful roar. The deafening sound left everyone nearby overwhelmed with dizziness. Taking advantage of the confusion, Goldo quickly picked up Laruku and ran with him. Just before they could escape, a beautiful woman suddenly stepped into their path together with her bodyguards. Goldo immediately recognized her as Emma and asked which side she intended to support. Emma answered that she was naturally on Goldo's side because Ars was clearly in desperate need of punishment. She asked whether Goldo would help her with that. Goldo laughed, deciding that with the queen's permission, there was no longer any reason to hold back. He told everyone to come at him before charging straight toward the guards and attacking them all. Laruku watched in surprise as Emma turned her attention toward him. She gently took his hand and sincerely apologized for involving him in such a ridiculous commotion. She then asked whether he was Laruku. After Laruku confirmed it, Emma introduced herself as the king's wife and warmly welcomed him. Laruku thanked her for receiving him so kindly. As he looked around, he could not help thinking that, in only the span of yesterday and today, Goldo had somehow introduced him to almost the entire royal family. Emma grew increasingly frustrated with Ars and openly expressed her anger toward him, treating him like a complete fool. She apologized to Goldo, explaining that she had been watching Ars closely to keep him from running away. Goldo assured her that there was no need to worry. What mattered most to him was that Ars received proper punishment this time. Emma confidently assured him that she would take care of it. Laruku glanced over at Ars and wondered if he was all right. Ars could only remark that Laruku was truly kind. Goldo immediately stopped Laruku from being too sympathetic, insisting that showing kindness would only spoil Ars. Ars then asked once again whether they would stay the night because he still wanted the chance to properly thank Laruku. Goldo hesitated for a moment before deciding that he no longer had any objections now that the trouble had settled down. Ars also asked Laruku directly, and Laruku admitted that he wanted to stay as well since he would have the rare opportunity to spend the night inside the royal castle. The group eventually headed inside the castle together. As they walked through the halls, Laruku asked Goldo if he could explain how he had become acquainted with Ars and the royal family. Goldo explained that there was nothing especially remarkable about it. Back when both of them were adventurers, they had naturally become friends while taking on quests together. Laruku paused in surprise after hearing that the queen had also once been an adventurer. Goldo confirmed that it was true. Emma had originally been the daughter of a noble family and had already been betrothed to Ars. However, she had been just as unusual as he was. When Ars announced that he wanted to become an adventurer, Emma immediately declared that she would do the same and follow him. Before long, it became clear that she possessed talent equal to Ars, making the two of them almost impossible to control. Goldo explained that they truly acted like a husband and wife while also remaining reliable partners. He then asked Laruku whether being around royalty made him nervous. As for himself, Goldo had always thought of them as nothing more than friends who happened to be a little different. There was no reason for him to feel nervous, and in his opinion, treating those two as ordinary examples of royalty would almost be disrespectful to the royal families of other countries. Emma heard Goldo's remarks and immediately stepped in, taking offense at what he had said. Regardless of Ars, she insisted that she was a normal person. Unlike him, a proper queen would never allow herself to openly display such obvious bloodlust. Emma then approached Laruku and asked whether Goldo kept saying strange things like that. She warned Laruku not to take everything he said seriously and invited him to have some food first. As they made their way toward the dining table, someone greeted Goldo and expressed surprise that he had actually come. Goldo looked at him and recognized him as Rio. He had grown considerably since the last time Goldo had seen him. Rio laughed, pointing out that 3 years had passed, so naturally he would have grown. He then noticed Laruku and became curious about who the small child was. His reaction quickly became exaggerated as he wondered whether Laruku was Goldo's child and whether Goldo had gotten married. Rio even seems disappointed that he had not been invited to the wedding ceremony. Goldo immediately corrected the misunderstanding and explained the real situation to him. After understanding what had happened, Rio was surprised. He then introduced himself as Riola's Recomedies, the eldest son of King Ars, and welcomed Laruku. He offered his hand, which sparkled brightly. Laruku was startled by the gesture and politely expressed how honored he was to meet him. Rio then unintentionally pulled Laruku's hand rather strongly and asked him to call him either Rio or Riolas. Laruku immediately felt that there was no way he could casually address a prince by a nickname. Rio accepted that such a way of addressing him would be inappropriate in public, but he still wanted Laruku to use the nickname when they were alone because it felt more natural to him. Emma also insisted that Laruku simply call her Miss Emma, leaving him surprised once again. Rio, meanwhile, seemed determined not to let go of Laruku's hand until Laruku finally addressed him by his preferred name. Goldo asked whether Laruku's hesitation was really necessary. He also pointed out that Laruku was already treating Ars without any special royal respect by casually addressing him as Mr. Laruku. Laruku finally accepted both Ryo and Emma's wishes, and Ryo released his hand. Laruku let out a quiet sigh, thinking that the whole situation felt more like dealing with a parent and child than members of a royal family. At the dining area, Laruku was amazed by how delicious everything was. As he looked around the table, he noticed two girls and wondered whether they were Ryo's sisters. He wanted to greet them properly as well. Ars then mentioned that the bathtub would be ready once they finished eating. He asked Laruku whether he wanted to take a bath, and Laruku immediately accepted. He was more than happy to do so, especially since it would be his first proper bath since being reincarnated. Later, Laruku and Goldo entered the bath together. Laruku was surprised by how enormous the bathing area was. Goldo explained that it was because Ars loved taking baths. Laruku found that hard to believe because a bath of that size seemed far beyond simply liking baths. Goldo eventually decided to leave first. Laruku chose to stay a little longer and enjoyed the warm water, while Goldo reminded him not to stay too long. Laruku continued relaxing in the bath, completely enjoying the experience. To him it was the best. As he soaked in the enormous bath, he began thinking that someday he would definitely have a house with a proper bath installed. The following day, Ryo confidently told Goldo that he had grown tremendously over the past 3 years and that Goldo should prepare himself. Goldo calmly replied that Ryo could come at him whenever he wanted. Watching from the side, Laruku realized that the two were about to have a mock battle. Ryo asked if they could spar before Goldo left because he believed he could at least put up a decent fight. However, the determination on Ryo's face made it clear that he was aiming for far more than that. Goldo accepted the challenge and told him to show everything he had. The mock battle began, and the sound of clashing swords echoed across the area. Ryo pressed forward with impressive skill and nearly gained the upper hand. Goldo acknowledged that Ryo's swordsmanship had become quite refined. However, Ryo created a small opening during the exchange. Goldo immediately slipped his sword through that gap, forcing Ryo into a difficult position before ultimately defeating him. Ryo let out a frustrated groan, and Goldo reminded him that he still had a long way to go. Ryo admitted that Goldo had not lost his edge at all. Goldo, however, insisted that he had already lost much of what he once possessed. Even so, he sincerely praised Ryo, believing that his swordsmanship had improved tremendously. The guards watching the match also praised the performance. One of them proudly declared that young Master Riolas had already grown beyond Sir Ars at the same age, while the captain also acknowledged his remarkable progress. Ryo immediately denied the compliment. He admitted that he had finally accepted the truth and still had a long way to go before catching up to either his father or Goldo. Even so, he confidently promised Goldo that he would surpass him before long. Goldo simply replied that it was something he genuinely looked forward to seeing. Laruku watched the entire match in amazement, impressed by both of them. Emma apologized for Ryo's behavior, but Goldo assured her that there was nothing to apologize for because he had truly enjoyed the match. He also thanked her for allowing them to stay at the castle. Laruku then wondered where Ars had gone. Emma explained that Ars had suddenly been called away because of an urgent matter and apologized because he was unable to see them off personally. Ryo quietly warned Laruku not to ask any more questions about it. Goldo agreed, explaining that some things were simply better left unknown, and asked Laruku if he understood. Laruku quietly realized that Ars was most likely being punished for the trouble he had caused the previous day. After leaving the castle, several days passed, and Laruku's daily routine returned. Every day, he washed his clothes, trained with Goldo in the morning, and studied under Fia in the afternoon. Although life had returned to normal, his desire to own a house with a proper bath only continued to grow stronger. He became even more determined to succeed as an adventurer so he could save enough money to make that dream come true. The thought of being able to take a bath whenever he wanted filled him with motivation, making him impatient to achieve it as soon as possible. One day, Laruku was suddenly summoned to the guild. Unsure of what had happened, he wondered why he had been called. Just then, a wagon arrived at the guild. It immediately caught Laruku's attention because it was rare for wagons to come there. As the wagon came to a stop, a beautiful girl stepped out. The moment Laruku saw her, he felt a sense of familiarity and wondered if she was the same girl he had seen at the castle. Inside the guild, the girl approached Laruku and reminded him that they had met at the castle the other day. She introduced herself as Rosalia, Re-Comedies. Following the previous encounters, yet another member of the royal family had appeared before him, this time a beautiful young maiden. Laruku could not help blushing as he looked at her. Ars apologized for calling Laruku over on such short notice because there was something he wanted his help with regarding Rosalia. Laruku politely introduced himself and admitted that he had been the one who left the castle without properly greeting her. As he looked at her, he thought she seemed like a gentle and quiet girl. At the same time, he felt that she resembled Ars quite a bit. Rosalia explained that people close to her usually called her Lia, and she hoped Laruku would call her by that name as well since they were practically family. Before long, everyone sat down together and tea was served. Lala handed a cup of tea to Laruku, and he politely thanked her. Ars explained that he had recently heard from the guildmaster that Laruku excelled in his studies. Because of that, he wanted to hire Laruku as Lea's private tutor. Laruku paused in surprise. He wondered whether Ars was asking him to take on the role as a favor, but he was also concerned because his schedule was already quite full. Before he could continue, Fia stopped him and explained that she had actually suggested replacing the time Laruku normally spent studying with her and using it for his work as Lea's private tutor instead. Laruku became silent for a moment, mistakenly thinking that after being abandoned by his parents, he was now being abandoned by Fia as well. Fia immediately realized the misunderstanding and explained that he had gotten the wrong idea. She assured him that she had not given up on him and told him not to feel discouraged. In fact, she had already taught him everything that a student was expected to learn at school, leaving Laruku genuinely surprised. She added that Laruku possessed an exceptionally good memory, making it enjoyable to teach him many different subjects. Lately, the books she had been giving him contained knowledge so advanced that even well-read elves were unfamiliar with much of the material. Laruku noticed that one of the books looked unusually thick. Lia gently reassured him that she did not mind. Laruku admitted that he still had not spent enough time practicing his magic. Hearing that, Ars suggested that he personally teach Laruku once his duties as Lea's private tutor were finished each day. That way, Laruku would not have to keep traveling back and forth. Fia pointed out that, despite the way Ars usually behaved, he was actually her finest disciple. Ars even attempted to demonstrate his magic. He wondered whether Laruku might feel uncomfortable learning directly from him, but Laruku immediately assured him that he felt no discomfort at all and sincerely thanked him. Later, Laruku returned to the cafeteria and shared that everything had been decided. For the next month, he would be working as Lea's private tutor. Goldo confidently replied that, knowing Laruku, he would do just fine. Even so, he admitted that traveling to the castle every single day would be difficult. Laruku explained that he would travel there together with Ms. Fia, while Mr. Ars would apparently be responsible for escorting him back to the inn afterward. Even so, he could not help wondering whether it was really appropriate to leave such tasks to the king and the guildmaster. Goldo reminded him that the idea had come from those two themselves and asked whether he thought they were simply letting him rely on them too much. Laruku admitted that both of them had already told him the very same thing. Goldo then went over Laruku's new daily schedule. Every morning, after finishing sword training with him, Laruku would continue working part-time by sorting the warehouse. After that, he would head to the castle to work as Lea's private tutor before ending the day with magic practice. Goldo admired how diligently Laruku worked, although he felt the workload was becoming a little excessive. He reminded Laruku not to push himself too hard. Laruku nodded and promised that he would keep that advice in mind. 3 weeks later, Laruku and Lia continued their private tutoring sessions. Lia asked what she should work on that day, and Laruku carefully explained the lesson to her. By then, the two of them had become much more comfortable around each other. During the first day at the castle, they had both been so nervous and awkward that they could barely hold a proper conversation, but that had gradually changed. Laruku quietly watched as Lia completed her work. Once she finished, she showed him the results to be checked. After looking it over, he confirmed that everything was correct. Laruku could not help thinking about how intelligent Lia was. They were already close to finishing the textbook that Miss Fia had lent him. After completing his duties as Lea's private tutor, Laruku reported their progress to Ars. With that finished, it was time for his magic training. Both Ars and Laruku were impressed by how smoothly everything had been progressing. During their conversation, Ars suddenly remembered something. He realized that he had not yet introduced Wallace. Curious, Laruku wondered if he was referring to Mr. Wallace. Ars asked Laruku whether he liked reading books. Laruku admitted that he did because books allowed him to learn many things he had never known before. Hearing that answer, Ars became convinced that the two of them would get along well, explaining that Wallace spent most of his time in the library. Ars led Laruku to the library and opened the door. Inside, he introduced his other son, Wallace. Laruku politely introduced himself in return. Wallace explained that he was the one responsible for overseeing Lea's studies. Laruku apologized for not greeting him sooner even though he had been regularly visiting the castle for quite some time. Wallace assured him that there was no need to apologize because it was Laruku's first time meeting him, so there was nothing to blame him for. Ars commented that Wallace spent nearly all of his time shut away in the library. Wallace casually corrected him, believing that he was not really shut away. He simply read the books that interested him, and before he realized it, an entire day had already passed. Wallace then asked Laruku whether he also enjoyed reading books. Laruku answered that he did, explaining that he had recently been reading history books about elves. Hearing that immediately caught Wallace's attention, filling him with excitement. Laruku offered to let him read one of the books. Wallace eagerly asked if he really could. At that moment, Laruku quietly thought that perhaps he should have taken the book out without letting Wallace notice it first. As Wallace began reading, he quickly found the contents very interesting. Laruku offered to lend him the book as long as he returned it the next time they met. Wallace happily accepted the offer and warmly welcomed Laruku to visit the library whenever he wanted. In his eyes, the two of them were already becoming close friends. After finishing the day's lessons, Ars sent Laruku home using teleportation magic. Laruku sincerely thanked him for always taking the time to see him home. Ars brushed it aside, believing that he was the one who should be grateful instead. Thanks to Laruku's tutoring, Leah's grades had improved significantly. As a reward, Ars handed Laruku 5 gold coins. He then asked whether Laruku would like to continue working as Leah's private tutor. Before Ars could even finish asking, Laruku immediately accepted, saying that he would be more than happy to continue. To Laruku, it meant taking another step toward achieving his dream of owning a house with a proper bath. Before Laruku left, Ars gave him one final piece of advice. He warned him that it would be best to stay on his guard. When Laruku looked puzzled, Ars pointed out that the royal capital's greatest hero, Goldo, the top-class magicians Fia and Lala, and even the king himself had all shown him unusual favor. Laruku quietly thought about those words for a moment. Ars remarked that Laruku was very perceptive. He explained that Laruku's political value had been steadily increasing. There had even been discussions about abducting him and forcing him to become a foster child within a noble family. Fortunately, Ars had already made sure to put an end to those plans. However, recently, those people had started becoming active once again. Because of that, he had assigned a spy dressed in black to secretly watch over Laruku for extra protection. Hearing that, Laruku suddenly realized something. He asked whether Ars was referring to the person who always wore black clothes. Ars looked surprised that Laruku had already noticed. Laruku explained that Goldo had trained him to sense the presence of people around him. He admitted that he had only managed to notice the spy once. Even so, Ars was genuinely impressed because very few people could accomplish that on their very first attempt. Laruku replied that Goldo had actually praised him at the time, which was something that rarely happened. Hearing that eased Ars's concerns, but he still reminded Laruku to remain on his guard. After that, Ars took his leave, and the two parted ways. Back in his room, Laruku wondered whether he might someday obtain a skill that could detect the presence of others. Thinking that it was about time, he decided to check his status. To his surprise, he had gained several more new skills. One of them immediately caught his attention. After seeing the skill called Wordless Incantation, he decided that he would try using it the next time he practiced magic. Once he had finished checking his status, Laruku quietly knelt down and offered his daily prayer. Ever since Mr. Samadila had reincarnated him into that world, he had met many different people. Every one of them had treated him with kindness and goodwill. When he had died after becoming the target of a wicked god, he had feared what kind of future awaited him. Looking back now, he truly felt grateful that he had come to this world. With those thoughts, he finished his routine prayer, hoping that his gratitude would somehow reach Samadila. Laruku was taking a bath when he noticed that the weather was pleasant once again. While he was relaxing, Imelda called out to him, reminding him that it was time for breakfast and asking him to come downstairs as soon as he was finished. Laruku answered that he would be there in a moment. Even so, he could not help wishing that he could enjoy baths like this more often. After heading to the cafeteria, someone greeted him and asked whether he had been eating well. Laruku greeted Mr. Doldos with a good morning and answered that he had. Doldos was someone Laruku had recently become close to, and he served as the leader of the inns that accommodated adventurers. Doldos informed him that several adventurers from outside the capital were currently staying at the guild, so he reminded Laruku to be careful. There was no way of knowing what outsiders might be planning. Laruku understood the warning, although he believed there was probably no need to worry because many other adventurers were also at the guild. Even so, Doldos advised him to stay cautious. If anything happened, Laruku could always rely on him because everyone there was on his side. Laruku thanked him for the concern. Just then, someone called out, desperately asking Laruku for help. It was Anna. She explained that her arithmetic grades had been so terrible that she was afraid her mother would become very angry with her. Doldos even commented that Imelda was especially frightening whenever she got upset. Laruku looked at Anna's paper and was surprised to see a score of 0, something he had never seen before. Anna admitted that she knew Laruku was very busy, but she still wanted him to teach her. Laruku gladly agreed to help. Anna excitedly asked whether he really meant it, and Laruku confirmed that he did. However, he explained that he would only be available at night and asked whether that would be alright. Anna happily thanked him. At that moment, Imelda climbed onto the table and scolded Anna. After that, life returned to its usual peaceful routine, and each day passed smoothly. Later, Goldo and Laruku continued their training together. Laruku declared that he would not lose that day. Goldo responded calmly and praised Laruku for maintaining such composure. In the very next moment, Goldo suddenly leaped forward, causing Laruku to lose his balance and fall. Laruku became frustrated after realizing that he had lost once again and quietly thought that he was still terribly weak. Goldo reassured him that his martial arts skills were steadily improving little by little and reminded him that there was no reason to rush. To Laruku, Goldo remained truly amazing. His martial arts skill had already reached the maximum level of 5. However, Goldo had once explained that those techniques had become difficult to use properly because of his artificial leg. Hearing that made Laruku wonder about something. When he had been choosing his initial skills, if he had selected the healing magic capable of curing everything, perhaps he might have been able to heal Goldo's injuries. Noticing Laruku's troubled expression, Goldo teased him and asked why he looked so serious, joking that he should smooth out those wrinkles on his face. He then asked whether Laruku would be going to the castle afterward because Ars had also summoned him that day. Laruku brightened at the idea and happily suggested that they go there together. When they arrived at the castle, Ars complained that it was incredibly frustrating to learn that so many nobles had begun setting their sights on the young Laruku. Even worse, strange rumors had started spreading, with some people even suspecting that Laruku might secretly be Ars's illegitimate child. Goldo immediately questioned what Ars meant by such a ridiculous rumor, while Laruku stood there in confusion. Goldo angrily scolded Ars, wondering what he and the country's nobility were even thinking. Ars visibly trembled before admitting that there was another matter that had become an even greater headache. He explained that he had received another letter from Laruku's former parents. Laruku paused after hearing that and quietly asked what the letter contained, already suspecting that they had written something malicious once again. The letter explained that Laruku's former parents believed their son might not actually have died. Because of that, they requested permission to meet the child named Laruku. Reading those words left Laruku feeling deeply troubled. He could not understand how they could even make such a request after everything that had happened. Ars asked Laruku whether he wished to meet them anyway. Laruku immediately refused. Ars explained that their sudden change in attitude had most likely come after hearing the rumors surrounding Laruku. In his opinion, they were simply planning to use him for their own benefit. The thought angered Ars so much that he considered stripping them of their noble rank. However, he knew he could not arrange something like that immediately. Instead, he began considering other ways to make life difficult for them. As Laruku listened, he found it difficult to believe that Ars was joking because the murderous intent in his voice felt far too real. At the same time, he sensed an equally overwhelming bloodlust coming from Goldo standing beside him. Ars believed that the growing rumors, together with the increasing number of kidnapping plots, would continue putting Laruku's safety at risk. Because of that, he came up with an idea. He asked the two of them what they thought about becoming a family. Both Laruku and Goldo froze in surprise, and Goldo even coughed from the shock. Ars happily clarified what he meant. He was asking whether Goldo would adopt Laruku. Ars explained that Goldo was the hero of the country. If Laruku became Goldo's son, anyone thinking of targeting him would think twice before making a move. Eventually, those people would simply give up. The idea of becoming part of Goldo's family filled Laruku with happiness. Even so, he could not stop thinking about whether Goldo truly wanted it because Goldo still looked unusually nervous. Goldo continued fidgeting, and Ars asked whether he did not want to adopt Laruku. Goldo immediately rejected that idea with great force. He then turned to Laruku and gently asked whether Laruku was truly alright with it because, even though he would only be an adoptive father, he would still become Laruku's father. Laruku quietly replied that he was the one who should be asking that question instead. He wondered whether Goldo was truly willing to accept someone like him, a child with such a strange and suspicious background, as his adopted son. Goldo immediately placed a hand on Laruku's shoulder and assured him that he had never once thought of him as strange. The Laruku he knew was someone who studied diligently and always gave his best in everything he did. Hearing those words brought a smile to Laruku's face, and Ars smiled as well. From that moment on, Laruku accepted Goldo as his father and entrusted himself to him. Goldo accepted him without hesitation and gently patted his head. Seeing everything settled, Ars remarked that he would immediately begin preparing the adoption paperwork. His thoughts then turned back to Laruku's former parents. He wondered how they would react to the news because they were an especially troublesome group of people. He could not shake the feeling that a dark storm was slowly making its way toward them. Far away in the forest, someone suddenly sneezed. The man quietly wondered who could possibly be talking about him. At the same time, it seemed that an important turning point was beginning to approach. Laruku woke up and wondered where he was. It was not the lodging where he usually stayed. As he looked around, he noticed Goldo's bed beside him and questioned why he was there. A moment later, the events of the previous day came back to him. Ars had finished preparing the documents and told both of them that everything was complete. From that moment on, they were officially a family. Laruku was amazed that the paperwork had been completed so quickly. Ars explained that, since Laruku had been an abandoned child, arranging the necessary documents had not been very difficult. Seeing both of them looking so bright and cheerful made Ars feel happier than ever. Laruku then wondered if that was all Ars needed from them. Ars explained that the remaining formal procedures would still take some time, so they might as well stay in the castle for the night. He even suggested that they live there together for a while. Having Laruku nearby would also give him peace of mind. Laruku hesitated because he did not want to become a burden, while Goldo wondered why he would be included as well. Ars explained that he wanted Laruku to continue serving as Leah's personal tutor for a long time. Traveling back and forth between the inn and the castle every day was difficult, and he would also be grateful to have someone his children could always talk to. Laruku accepted the idea without any complaints. Seeing that Laruku agreed, Goldo accepted it as well. Laruku felt happy because living in the castle meant he could take a bath whenever he wanted. Ars added that it would also mean Goldo could train Riolas. He was sure Riolas would be delighted because he looked up to Goldo. Goldo pointed out that he still had work to do. Ars reminded him that he had been working seriously all this time and that taking some rest would not hurt. He even joked that, with everyone already being taken care of, Goldo was practically useless as a receptionist. The remark struck Goldo, but Laruku comforted him, making it clear that he was not scared of him in the slightest. Deciding it was time to leave, Laruku thought it would be better not to wake Goldo. Before going, he checked his status and saw that he was now officially registered as Goldo's son. The sight of it brought a smile to his face. 1 year later, Lia called for Laruku. Curious about what was needed, he headed over. As soon as he arrived, everyone suddenly gathered around him and wished him a happy birthday. Laruku stood there in surprise. He wondered if it was really his birthday, since he had never celebrated one before. Ars explained that Laruku had originally been born into a noble family and that his birth certificate still existed, so there was no mistake. It truly was his birthday. On top of that, it also happened to be Goldo's birthday. Laruku turned to Goldo to confirm if it was true. Goldo admitted that it was, adding that he had never realized they shared the same birthday. Laruku happily felt that it was like fate. Goldo reacted awkwardly before suddenly coughing and nearly choking Ars in his embarrassment. Ars could only tell him to stop taking it out on him and quit trying to hide how embarrassed he was. Laruku, Leah, and Wallace spent the day happily celebrating together. After the celebration, Laruku and Goldo went to take a bath. Laruku stretched his body and enjoyed the warm water, feeling completely at ease. Goldo noticed how much Laruku loved baths. Laruku admitted that he did because there was no better place to wash away an entire day's exhaustion. Goldo quietly accepted the answer. Not long after, Ars entered the bath as well, saying that it really was the perfect way to relieve their tiredness. Laruku was startled by his sudden appearance. Goldo asked whether he had already finished his work. Ars replied that he had, more or less. Recently, a large part of his workload had been lifted thanks to Laruku. Now, his goal was to have Riolas succeed to the throne as soon as possible. Ars praised Laruku for all the help he had given and sincerely thanked him. Although Laruku had been helping Ars, the work mostly consisted of simple calculations and sorting paperwork. Even so, Laruku remained deeply grateful for how generously Ars paid him for those tasks. As he thought about it, Laruku asked his father whether his house had a bath. Goldo admitted that it was nothing as large or luxurious as the one in the castle, but it did have one. Laruku looked genuinely surprised to hear that. He became frustrated with himself, realizing that it had never occurred to him to ask earlier. He had spent all that time saving money to buy a house with its own bath. Goldo asked whether Laruku had really been saving money. Ars explained that adventurers usually had to spend a great deal replacing their weapons and equipment. Because of that, keeping savings was always a wise decision. Laruku agreed with that reasoning. After a moment, Ars asked whether Laruku might be interested in attending the academy. Laruku immediately wondered if he was referring to the Lactoria Academy. Ars explained that the Lactoria Academy accepted everyone regardless of rank or social standing. Commoners, merchants, and even members of the royal family like Leah and Wallace all studied there. He had also heard that some students trained in swordsmanship and magic while continuing to work as adventurers at the same time. Laruku thought the academy sounded remarkably open-minded. Ars admitted that he had been thinking about enrolling Laruku there the following year. Laruku felt the suggestion had come very suddenly, and Ars agreed that it had. Laruku then understood what Ars was really trying to say. Now that Leah's grades had improved, it had already been decided that she would transfer to the highest ranking class. However, she seemed worried about whether she would be able to keep up with the lessons there. Because of that, she wanted Laruku to attend alongside her, believing his presence would give her confidence and help her study harder. Laruku asked if that was what Ars had meant. Ars was pleased that Laruku had understood so quickly. Thinking back to the schools from his previous world, Laruku decided that he would be happy to attend. Before the matter could be settled, Goldo immediately objected and told them to wait. He scolded Laruku for accepting so much responsibility so easily. He worried that Laruku could be ambushed by dangerous people on his way to school or even become the target of bullying once he got there. Laruku felt that his father was worrying too much and believed everything would be fine. More importantly, he genuinely wanted to experience going to school. Goldo called his name in a serious tone, leaving Laruku wondering if his decision was unacceptable. After letting out a sigh, Goldo accepted Laruku's decision. Since Laruku had already made up his mind, there was nothing more for him to say. However, he declared that he would personally train Laruku properly so that he would be capable of handling any danger that might come his way. Both Laruku and Ars were left speechless by the sudden declaration. Laruku quietly hoped Ars could stop his father if his enthusiasm became too much. Ars admitted that it would probably be impossible once Goldo had become that motivated. Goldo immediately began thinking about a training schedule. Laruku looked to Ars once more for help, but Ars could only admit that there was nothing he could do. At the Lactoria Academy, the day of the entrance examination had finally arrived. Before the exams began, Lei encouraged Laruku, believing that he would definitely be fine and urging him to do his best. Laruku thanked her before heading off on his own. As he walked toward the academy, he thought about the intense training his father had put him through ever since it had been decided that he would take the entrance exam. He hoped all of that hard training would finally pay off and allow him to perform well no matter what kind of test awaited him. When Laruku arrived at the academy, he looked around the grounds until he finally found the first examination hall. He entered the room, and the professor asked whether everyone had taken their seats. Laruku immediately found his place and sat down. The professor introduced himself as Carl, explaining that he taught magic classes at the academy. He announced that the written portion of the entrance examination would now begin. Carl activated a spell, causing the exam papers to fly through the air until one landed in front of every student. Laruku recognized it as wind magic. After confirming that everyone had received their papers, Carl officially signaled the start of the examination. Laruku focused on the questions in front of him. As soon as he read through them, he realized they covered the same material he had studied with Nisfia. Confident that he knew the answers, he calmly worked through the test. As time continued to pass, Laruku finished his paper and walked over to Carl. He informed him that he had completed the examination. Carl looked surprised, realizing that barely 15 minutes had passed. Laruku quietly reminded him that the examination was still in progress, making Carl realize he had almost spoken too loudly. Carl accepted Laruku's answer sheet and handed him a form, instructing him to proceed to the second examination hall. Laruku accepted it and left, thinking that the written exam had been much easier than he had expected. After arriving at the second examination hall, a woman greeted him and noted that he was the first examinee to arrive, meaning he had finished the written test earlier than everyone else. Without wasting time, she explained the rules of the second examination. This test would focus on magic. Laruku would have 100 seconds to strike a series of targets using magic, and he was free to use any magic attribute he wished. She reminded him that the purpose of the exam was to measure the precision of his magic. Because of that, he needed to avoid destroying the targets or using any wide area spells. Laruku acknowledged the instructions. The woman pointed out the line he was not allowed to cross before encouraging him to do his best. As soon as she signaled the start of the second examination, Laruku realized that there were many targets waiting to be hit. He knew he would have to maintain both speed and accuracy throughout the test. Fortunately, he had already gone through similar training with Ars. Laruku carefully aimed at each target one after another. The seconds continued to tick away as he maintained his concentration. He successfully struck the final target at the exact moment the time limit came to an end. Feeling the tension leave his body, Laruku was relieved that the test was over. Focusing so intensely had left him exhausted. The woman praised his effort and handed him another paper, instructing him to deliver it to the next proctor. As Laruku left the examination hall, he reflected on the test. Although he had managed to hit every target, he had finished with almost no time remaining. Even so, he hoped that would be enough. When Laruku entered the third examination hall, he found the proctor fast asleep. He first tried to wake him gently, but the man did not respond. Laruku then raised his voice to let him know that he had arrived for the examination. The man finally woke up with a laugh, explaining that he had been dozing off because he had to arrive early. He then instructed Laruku to choose any weapon he wanted from the selection nearby. As Laruku examined the weapons, he noticed that every blade had been dulled. The proctor explained that the third examination would be a weapon duel. The only magic allowed during the match would be stat enhancement spells, and Laruku acknowledged the rule. Before the duel begins, the proctor introduces himself as Morris, the instructor in charge of combat training. Laruku also gives his name. Morris explains that the premise of the exam is simple. If Laruku can land even a single hit on him, he will pass. Without wasting any time, Morris swings his blade at Laruku. Laruku blocks the attack head-on, and Morris notices that Laruku has enough strength to withstand his attacks directly. Laruku explains that despite his appearance, he trains every day. Morris acknowledges that this is good. However, Laruku realizes that he cannot keep taking many more hits. If the fight continues to drag on like this, he will eventually lose. Laruku decides to use what he learned during his training with Ars. He activates strength amplification, then teleports behind Morris and prepares to land a strike. For a moment, Laruku believes he has already caught him, but Morris is suddenly gone. Laruku is left stunned as Morris appears behind him. The proctor points out how close the attack had been. Morris reminds Laruku that he never said he would refrain from using stat augmentation. Laruku launches a series of attacks at Morris, but the proctor dodges every one of them with ease. Eventually, Laruku loses his footing and trips over himself. At that moment, Laruku realizes that Morris has been toying with him the entire time. Morris makes it clear that Laruku will never pass if he continues at that pace. Laruku asks for a moment to catch his breath, and Morris allows it, knowing that there is still plenty of time left. Laruku gathers his focus and concentrates his strength amplification on his legs. He then suddenly dashes forward with all the power he has gathered. This time, his attack connects with Morris, sending the proctor crashing to the ground. Morris admits that he had let his guard down. Laruku immediately checks whether he is alright. Morris reassures him that there is no need for Laruku to feel sorry. All Laruku needs to do is hand over his form so that Morris can give him the passing stamp. As he looked over the form, the proctor noticed Laruku's surname, Valtoris. The name seemed familiar to him, prompting him to ask about Laruku's father. Laruku proudly revealed that his father was Goldo Valtoris. The proctor paused for a moment, surprised that Goldo had a son. Curious, Laruku wondered if the two knew each other. The proctor revealed that they had once belonged to the same adventuring party. Hearing Goldo's name again after such a long time made him genuinely happy. With that, Laruku had completed every part of the entrance examination. He thanked the proctor before leaving, and the proctor told him that he looked forward to seeing him again at the academy. Laruku returned to the registration desk and submitted his completed examination form. He was informed that the results would be posted on the academy's notice boards in 2 days. After returning to the castle, Laruku found Ars telling Goldo that he worried too much. The moment Goldo noticed Laruku, he immediately rushed over and asked how the examinations had gone. Laruku answered that he believed he had done well. Goldo burst with excitement at the response, while Ars reminded him that he was being far too loud. The day after the entrance exam, Ars happened to see Laruku passing by and realized that the timing was perfect. He caught Laruku's attention and approached him, explaining that Wallace had asked him to deliver a message. Wallace had finally gotten hold of the thing Laruku had been looking for. After thanking Ars, Laruku immediately rushed toward Wallace, while Ars waved goodbye and watched him leave. He could not help but notice how Laruku seemed to be getting faster with each passing day. Laruku opened the library door and found Wallace waiting inside. Wallace had already been expecting him. Laruku quickly confirmed whether he had really found the thing, and Wallace admitted that it had taken an incredible amount of effort to locate it. He only hoped Laruku would be able to make good use of it. The item was a book titled The Fun Way of Growing Rice. Laruku's expression immediately brightened. He recognized the book and happily accepted it, thanking Wallace for finding it. Since Wallace was responsible for maintaining the library, he explained that Laruku could return it whenever he was finished with it. Laruku accepted the arrangement and took the book with him. When he returned to his room, Laruku opened the book and was immediately surprised by what he found. The entire book had been handwritten. He was amazed by the author, who had traveled across the world in an effort to spread knowledge about rice cultivation. There were even several memos written in Japanese. The discovery made Laruku wonder if the author had also been reincarnated into this world. Goldo suddenly arrived after coming from the bath and was surprised to find that Laruku was still awake. Laruku assured him that he would sleep soon, while Goldo reminded him not to push himself too hard. As Laruku continued reading, he could hardly believe that this world actually had rice. He was glad that he had decided to ask Wallace about it and give the possibility a chance. After reading for a while, Laruku finally paused. He decided that he would continue the book later and went to bed. The following day, Goldo and Laruku were taking a bath together. After a hard day of training, Goldo found the bath relaxing. Laruku then brought up something he wanted to ask his father. Goldo immediately noticed how formal he was being and wondered why Laruku was acting so serious. Laruku explained that his body had been growing lately. He had also become strong enough to properly wield a one-handed sword. Goldo agreed that Laruku had certainly grown. With that in mind, Laruku suggested that he should be allowed to leave the town. Goldo immediately refused. Laruku became frustrated by how quickly his father rejected the idea. Goldo reminded him that he had already explained this many times. The outside world was not as friendly as Laruku imagined, and once something bad happened to him, there would be no way to turn back time and undo it. Even after hearing his father's concerns, Laruku still tried to persuade him. He asked Goldo not to worry about him so much. Laruku also pointed out that his daily training had already allowed him to maximize nearly all of his stats, with only luck and dexterity remaining below their maximum. He already knew that his father was overly protective, but he had not realized just how far it went. With the stats he had built through his training, Laruku believed that he should at least be safe within the immediate area around the city. He finally pouted and reluctantly accepted his father's decision. Goldo thanked him for understanding. However, Laruku was not finished negotiating. He proposed that if he managed to enroll in the academy, Goldo should allow him to leave the town as a reward for successfully passing the entrance process. The request caught Goldo completely off guard. He questioned whether Laruku truly understood what he was asking for, while Laruku simply pouted and sulked. In the end, Goldo gave in and agreed. Before the moment could continue, someone arrived. Ryo appeared and noticed that the two of them seemed to be having a good time. Laruku turned toward him, and Ryo immediately noticed how much Laruku had changed since the last time they met. He had clearly bulked up. Laruku proudly explained that his father had been training him every day. However, when it came to actually bulking up, Ryo had developed much more than Laruku. Ryo acknowledged that it might be true, but he had been training for much longer than Laruku. He even considered asking Mr. Goldo for another duel. Then Ryo remembered the reason he had come. His father had been looking for both Laruku and Goldo. Laruku became curious about what could have happened, while Goldo could only hope that it was not something foolish. Laruku reminded Goldo that he had heard Ryo and Ars were looking for them, so they should probably get out of the bath. Goldo only smirked, pointing out that Ars was looking for Laruku as well. If the bath was too hot for him, he was free to leave. Instead, Laruku splashed water directly into Goldo's face. Goldo became irritated, complaining that the water was too hot. Laruku smiled to himself, feeling that he had won. As an avid lover of baths, he could not afford to lose a contest like this. However, his body soon began to wobble and he collapsed onto the ground. Goldo immediately yelled at him and scolded him for enduring the heat so long that he ended up fainting. Laruku still held on to his pride as the bathmeister, leaving Goldo confused about what he was even talking about. He also questioned whether Laruku would really be able to meet Ars in that condition. Laruku insisted that he could. When they finally went to meet Ars, Goldo was carrying Laruku. Ars immediately checked whether Laruku was alright, and Laruku assured him that he was fine. After they arrived, Ars apologized for making them come in such a state. However, he needed them to head to the academy immediately because the headmaster wanted to see Laruku. Laruku was surprised. He had expected the exam results to simply be posted on a bulletin board. When they arrived at the academy, the headmaster informed Laruku that they could not permit him to enroll in the academy. Laruku and Goldo both froze for a moment, completely dumbfounded by the decision. Laruku's mood dropped. Ars then questioned the headmaster, finding it difficult to believe that Laruku's scores were lacking when considering his overall ability. He asked whether there was some reason behind the decision. The headmaster apologized if she had not explained herself clearly enough. She confirmed that Laruku's scores were indeed good, just as Ars had pointed out. However, that was exactly where the problem lay. His scores were too good. There was simply nothing the academy could teach him. Laruku tried to argue that he had barely passed the magic exam and had struggled greatly during the dueling exam. The headmaster explained that Laruku had never needed to hit every target in order to pass the magic test. The purpose of the exam was to determine whether an examinee could properly use magic while under the pressure of a time limit. The same applied to the dueling portion. It was unreasonable to expect a child to successfully land an attack on an X-rank adventurer, especially under those circumstances. She considered Laruku an exceptionally talented child and believed that his future would benefit far more from gaining practical experience as a castle guardian or an adventurer. Laruku was about to argue again when Goldo scratched the side of his neck. He then addressed Neza, the headmaster, acknowledging that he understood where she was coming from. However, he wanted to know whether she truly believed that Laruku would gain absolutely nothing from attending the academy. Laruku was shocked to discover that Goldo and Neza already knew each other. Goldo questioned whether studying was really the only thing students did at an academy. Around them, the students could be seen happily chatting with one another. Neza remarked that Goldo seemed to be getting soft in the head, then acknowledged that his point was valid. She apologized to Laruku for all the trouble he had gone through and changed the academy's decision. They would be glad to accept Laruku as a new student. Laruku returned to his room and began packing his belongings. Goldo checked whether he had everything, and Laruku confirmed that he did. It was finally time to store everything inside his item box. The room had already been spacious, but after Laruku removed all of his belongings, it felt even larger. Goldo agreed that the room looked much more empty, and today marked the day they would be leaving the castle. Laruku informed Ars that he would live with his father once his transfer date at the academy had been decided. Ars acknowledged his decision. Lia was visibly down and struggled with the thought of Laruku leaving. She asked whether he was really going to go, and Laruku confirmed that he was. However, they would be able to see each other again soon at the academy. Emma tried to comfort Lia and reminded her not to trouble Laruku too much. Lia understood, but she still wanted to know whether she could visit Laruku's house and play with him next time. Her eyes became teary as she pleaded to be allowed to come and play. Laruku agreed. Lia began crying, overwhelmed by the thought of being separated from him and feeling that she would be very lonely. Before leaving, Laruku thanked them for everything they had done for him over the past 2 years. Goldo finally brought up the matter that had been on his mind. While they had been living in the castle, they never needed to worry about food. However, now that they had left, he was unsure of what they would do from this point forward. He figured that he would have to learn how to cook, but Laruku quickly offered to handle the cooking for both of them. After all, he had the preparation skill. Goldo was surprised and wanted to know when Laruku had obtained it. Laruku explained that he had possessed it from the beginning. Still, Laruku was unsure whether things would actually work out. Ever since his reincarnation, he had never cooked a single meal in his life. Goldo reminded him that if he had already acquired the skill, then there was no reason to worry. The preparation skill was extremely rare, and possessing it allowed Laruku to know the recipes for dishes he had made before. As he raised the skills level, the food he prepared should also become more delicious. When Laruku revealed that his preparation skill was already at level 3, Goldo became even more surprised. After lunch, Goldo suggested that they should go out and buy some groceries. Laruku agreed. The two of them later sat together on a bench while eating. Laruku noticed that Goldo was still as popular with the townspeople as ever. Goldo explained that it was mainly because he had lived there ever since leaving the rural countryside. He had spent enough time in the town to become acquainted with nearly everyone. Laruku became curious about the rural countryside. Goldo explained that it was a very distant place, although it was still within their country's borders. After their time outside, the two of them began heading home. When they finally arrived, Laruku was surprised by the size of the house. It was much larger than he had expected. He wondered whether Goldo had been living there alone. Goldo confirmed that he had. Laruku felt that the house was far too large for one person, but Goldo explained that there was a reason for its size. Back when Goldo had only been a young and inexperienced adventurer, he had saved his money carefully. The house had originally been a simple and modest place. Then an incident occurred. Although Goldo had somehow managed to defeat the threat he faced, he had been badly injured and had to remain hospitalized for some time. When he eventually returned home, he discovered that his house had been renovated. The townspeople had apparently done it out of gratitude for what he had done. Even so, the house was simply too large for Goldo to live in by himself. He was glad that Laruku was now there with him. Laruku began preparing the ingredients for their first meal together. It was the first time he had ever cooked, and he did not want his first attempt to end in failure. Because of that, he decided to leave the more difficult recipes for another time. He considered whether he should simply salt the meat or roast it. He also thought about preparing a vegetable soup. Laruku continued working with the ingredients, carefully preparing everything until the meal was finally finished. Goldo noticed the smell coming from the kitchen and found it pleasant. Laruku felt confident about what he had prepared. Goldo tasted the soup and paused for a moment as he took in the flavor. He was clearly pleased with the result. Laruku became embarrassed by the reaction. Goldo then decided that Laruku should take over the cooking duties from that point forward. Laruku agreed. A few days after moving into his father's house, Laruku and Goldo were cleaning the plates together. Goldo commented on how well Laruku had scrubbed them, while Laruku felt that cooking for Goldo was gratifying because he always finished everything he was given. Goldo insisted that Laruku should at least let him handle the dishes, but Laruku reassured him that it was fine and told him to go ahead and take a bath. Goldo apologized for making Laruku handle everything, and Laruku reminded him that he would be relying on him again the next day. Laruku then returned to his room and fixed his bed. Having a bedroom all to himself felt great, but just before going to sleep, he suddenly remembered something he had forgotten. He took out his useful box and remembered the small sculpture of a god he had hidden inside it. Laruku placed the sculpture in his closet and prayed, feeling grateful that he had been able to enjoy another day in the Isekai world. As he finished praying, Laruku suddenly began to glow. He felt as though his body had just started shining, but he quickly wondered if it was only his imagination playing tricks on him. With that thought, he went to bed and settled in for the night. The next day, Laruku and Goldo were both shocked when they saw Doldos. Doldos greeted Laruku and asked whether he was heading to the guild. He also wondered why Laruku had come from Goldo's house. Laruku explained that he had been living in the house with his father since a few days earlier. Doldos was pleased to hear that and considered it a good thing for Laruku, leaving Goldo confused. Doldos explained that the house was far too spacious for someone to live in by himself, but Goldo gave no response. Doldos then asked Laruku whether he had not been surprised by how large the house was. Laruku admitted that he had been. He had never imagined that the house would be that huge. Doldos explained that they had helped with the construction of the house. His old man was a carpenter, so they could not resist helping out. Goldo immediately bumped Doldos, making it clear that he did not want to hear anything more about it. Doldos then accidentally let it slip that Goldo had told him to keep it a secret. Goldo explained that Doldos's father was the one responsible for making his house so large and that there was nothing he could do about it. Instead, he challenged Doldos to a drinking contest. Doldos accepted the challenge but asked Goldo to go easy on him. Laruku became curious about Goldo's tolerance for alcohol. Doldos asked whether Laruku was familiar with dwarfs. Laruku confirmed that he was, so Doldos explained that dwarfs were extremely good at holding their liquor. When they truly set their minds to drinking, one of them could empty an entire bar of its alcohol supplies in a single session. Goldo had even managed to defeat a dwarf in a drinking contest before, which left Laruku surprised. When they finally arrived at the guild, Laruku noticed that people were whispering among themselves. Goldo also sensed that something seemed wrong and wondered what was happening. Laruku considered the possibility that a new dungeon might have appeared, but Dolda said he had not heard any rumors like that. Goldo looked around the guild and noticed several unfamiliar faces among the people there. A sudden shiver ran through him as he observed them. Lala then came down and noticed Goldo, finding their arrival well-timed. Laruku greeted her as well. He became curious about what was happening, and Lala confirmed that there was something she wanted his help with. She hoped Laruku could come with her for a moment because there was something she needed him to assist with. Laruku agreed, making it clear that he would help if it was something he could do. Lala was grateful for his willingness to assist. They stopped in the hallway, where Lala indicated that the place they were looking for was right there. Laruku looked at the wall in confusion, wondering if that was really all there was. Before he could understand what was happening, Lala slipped straight through the wall, making both Laruku and Goldo flinch. Goldo quickly realized that the wall was only a false barrier made from magical energy. The walls themselves were moving, revealing a hidden space behind them. Goldo had never known that a place like this existed inside the guild. Lala was surprised that he did not know about it. The guild master had created the room a few years earlier because she had been too lazy to travel all the way back home. Lala opened the door, and the sight inside immediately made them lose their balance. Things were scattered everywhere, filling the room with clutter. Goldo hurriedly checked whether Laruku was still alive, while Laruku recovered from the surprise. He then realized that this was the reason Lala had brought them there and asked if this was the task she wanted their assistance with. Lala confirmed that it was. She needed Laruku and Goldo to help clean up the huge mess and rescue the guildmaster from inside. Lala explained that the guildmaster had entered the room only a few moments earlier to clean it, but she believed that the woman was probably buried somewhere underneath all the things. Laruku understood the situation and agreed to help. The three of them began cleaning the place. Laruku used his useful box to store away the various things scattered around the room. While putting things away, he came across a loaf of moldy bread and wondered why it had been left there. He then looked around for his father, and Goldo raised his hand to indicate that he was right there. Lala focused on organizing the books and wiping the window while Laruku and Goldo continued clearing the clutter. After they finally finished, all of them were left panting from the work. Laruku caught his breath as they looked over what they had accomplished. They had finally finished cleaning 2 rooms. Lala expressed her appreciation for the help Laruku and Goldo had given her. However, the guildmaster was still nowhere to be found. Lala realized that this meant the guildmaster had to be somewhere inside the final room. Lala used her magic to create a large globe around them, enclosing the group inside it. She explained that as long as they remained within the barrier, they would be protected from anything that might fall on them. Goldo found it strange that Lala was willing to use magic simply for the purpose of organizing a room. Lala opened the door to the final room. Inside, countless books and bottles were piled together in a messy arrangement. Laruku was relieved to see that there had been no sudden avalanche of objects. Lala explained that everything had somehow miraculously remained stacked in a strange way. Laruku looked at the unstable piles and could tell that they seemed ready to collapse from even the slightest touch. He carefully began cleaning up the books, and during the process, he noticed Miss Fia. Fia was surprised to find Laruku and Goldo there and immediately became confused about what was happening. At the same time, Lala ordered Laruku to move some boxes out of the way. Fia suddenly flinched when she realized that Lala had come as well. Lala quickly covered Fia's mouth, preventing her from continuing her familiar reaction to seeing Lala there. Fia explained that she had intended to clean the room, but Lala caught her reading instead and even grabbed her hat. Lala already knew that something like this would happen, and Fia ended up getting hurt in the process. Goldo then grabbed Laruku and pulled him aside so that he could make an important point clear. No matter what happened, Laruku needed to avoid making Ms. Lala angry. Goldo recalled an incident from some time earlier involving an A-rank adventurer. Lala had already warned the adventurer 3 times, but the man still became angry with the maid. The adventurer demanded to know why he had not received his reward, while the maid reminded him that he had defeated the wrong target. The adventurer became even more furious. He grabbed the maid by the neck and began choking her while demanding that she give him his reward. Before the situation could worsen, someone suddenly grabbed hold of the adventurer's arms. Lala ordered the adventurer to release the maid, but he refused. In the next moment, Lala struck his arm with enough force to break his hand. She then grabbed him by the collar and threw him away. Goldo explained that Lala had completely dominated the fight. She had gotten on top of the adventurer and continued pummeling him down. He had resisted for a while, but in the end, his efforts were futile. The fight left him mentally scarred, and he eventually retired from adventuring. As for Lala, she was suspended from her duties for half a year. Laruka finally understood why the guild had been so quiet that day. Goldo explained that it was because of the murderous aura spilling from Lala. Lala apologized and admitted that she had been trying to hide it. She had not realized that they could still sense it. Laruka looked toward Fia and noticed that her eyes seemed completely lifeless. At that moment, he made a quiet promise to himself that he would never anger Lalatina. Lala then told Fia that there were some things they needed to discuss. As Laruku and Goldo were preparing to leave, Fia stopped them and tried to get them to help her as well. Laruku suddenly pointed out a pretty butterfly, directing his attention toward his father. Fia immediately insisted that there was no way a butterfly could be inside the room. Fia eventually accepted the situation and apologized. Laruku also apologized, but he made it clear that he could not help her. Afterward, Laruku and Goldo returned home. Laruku began cleaning the place when someone arrived at the door. It was a delivery girl carrying a package for him. Laruku wondered if the package was really addressed to him before taking it. When he opened it, he found a uniform inside. He picked up the letter and discovered that it contained his school uniform and textbooks. Laruku then remembered that he had been wearing Wallace's clothes during the exam. Seeing his own school uniform now made him happy. Just as Laruku was about to open the letter, someone knocked on the door. It turned out to be Doldas. He apologized for intruding, and Laruku explained that if he was looking for his father, Goldo was currently at the guild. Doldas explained that he had business with Laruku that day. He had come to celebrate Laruku's admission to the academy and brought some presents with him. One of the gifts was from Doldas and the others, while another came from Imelda and the people at the Small Bear Inn. Laruku was happy to receive the gifts and thanked Doldas. He also mentioned that he had apparently received his marks, and that people had come to him because they wanted him to give a speech at the entrance ceremony. Doldas was both happy and amazed to hear about it. Laruku looked through the gifts and found a set of stationery items from Imelda and the others. The gift from Doldas and his group was a child's robe. Doldas explained that once Laruku settled into the academy, he would begin his life as an adventurer. Because of that, they thought the robe would be useful for him. Laruku put on the robe and carefully accepted the gift, intending to take good care of it. He then continued packing his belongings as the long-awaited days at the academy drew closer. At last, the time had come. Laruku was about to begin his school days at the academy, and his heart was filled with excitement for what awaited him. At Lactoria Academy, the day of the entrance ceremony had finally arrived. Lia was checking on Laruku, who was quietly mumbling the words he planned to use for his speech. When Lia greeted him that morning, Laruku turned toward her and returned the greeting. She immediately noticed the dark bags under his eyes and became concerned about whether he was all right. Laruku explained that he had unknowingly stayed up all night while reviewing his speech. Before they could continue, a girl with a ponytail approached him. She recognized him as Laruku and introduced herself as Sarah, expressing how nice it was to meet him. Sarah explained that Lia had talked about Laruku so much that meeting him did not feel like their first time seeing each other. Lia tried to stop Sarah from continuing, but Laruku simply laughed and welcomed the chance for them to get along. A moment later, someone entered and informed them that the ceremony was about to begin. Everyone needed to head over. Laruku soon found himself standing on the stage. It was time for his speech. He went through the words he had prepared while all the students listened. When he finally finished, the students applauded, and Laruku bowed before stepping away from the stage. Once it was over, Laruku felt relieved. The experience had been far more nerve-wracking than he expected. As Laruku, Lia, and Sarah walked through the hallway afterward, Lia praised him for giving a good speech. Sarah also told him that he had looked really cool while standing on the stage. Lia then mentioned that she had heard from her brother that Goldo had given Laruku permission to venture outside the capital. Laruku confirmed that it was true, but only after he became settled into his new life at the academy. Sarah immediately became interested in the idea of traveling outside the capital and wanted to make a trip there sometime soon. Lia agreed that it sounded fun. Laruku was also fine with the idea, but he remembered that there were monsters outside the capital. He became concerned about whether traveling there would not be too dangerous for the two of them. Lia realized that Laruku had apparently never been told about their abilities. Despite her appearance, she was actually quite skilled as a magic user. She had reached level 4 in light element magic and demonstrated her magic for Laruku. Laruku was impressed, thinking that level 4 was quite good. Before he could react further, he suddenly got splashed and felt the cold water against him. Sarah then revealed that she was level 4 in water element magic. Laruku was amazed by both of them and wondered why their levels were so high. Sarah explained that they had received divine protection from the gods. Lia was under the graceful protection of the god of light, while Sarah had received protection from the god of water. Laruku was surprised by this revelation. He then realized that he was not the only one who had received the blessings of a god. There were others like him who had also been granted divine protection. Inside their classroom, the students were already talking among themselves. The room was filled with conversations as they became acquainted with one another. When their professor arrived and walked toward them, the classroom quickly fell silent. Carl thanked everyone for attending the entrance ceremony and introduced himself as their homeroom teacher. Beside him stood Morit, the assistant homeroom teacher. Carl welcomed everyone and expressed that it was good to meet them all. Carl then explained that the students would introduce themselves one by one, beginning from the front of the classroom. The first student immediately stood up, visibly rattled by the attention. He shyly introduced himself as Leon. From his appearance, it was clear that he was a demi-human, and he expressed his hope that they would all get along. Next came Kagra. She explained that her name was somewhat unusual because she had been born very far from that region. Even so, she hoped that everyone would get along with her. The next student introduced herself as Melria Luval. She possessed holy element magic. After her came Dolan. His appearance did not immediately reveal it, but he was a dragonaut. He was not very skilled with magic, but he was good with a sword. Laruku was already familiar with dragonauts from one of his books. According to what he had read, they were descendants of dragons and humans. However, seeing one in person was completely different, and Laruku was amazed because it was his first time encountering a dragonaut directly. The next student introduced himself as Roke Dudley of the Dudley Company. Laruku recognized the name because he had heard that Dudley was one of the biggest companies in the capital. As he looked around the classroom, Laruku realized that there really were many different kinds of students gathered together at the academy. When his turn finally came, Laruku introduced himself and expressed that it was nice to meet everyone. After all the students had finished their introductions, Carl thanked them. With the introductions complete, Carl moved on to the next part of their first day. He planned to give the new students a tour of the academy facilities so they could become familiar with their new surroundings. The students began walking down the hallway, and Laruku soon felt that someone was staring at him. He turned toward Morid and apologized in case he was mistaken. Laruku wondered if Morid had something he wanted to tell him, but Morid initially dismissed it. Laruku looked away, but Morid suddenly stopped him and asked him to wait for a moment. He seemed hesitant at first before quietly asking Laruku how he was doing. After pausing for a while, Laruku answered that his father was doing well. Laruku considered telling his father that Morid wanted to meet with him, but Morid immediately disagreed and made it clear that there was no need for that. Morid struggled to explain what was on his mind. He eventually revealed that when Laruku's father had stood against the dragon by himself, Morid had not been able to help him at all. Because of that, he had come to believe that he had no right to face Laruku's father. Laruku looked at Morid and reminded him that his father was not the kind of person who held grudges. It was true that his relationship with the adventurers had once been rocky because of a misunderstanding, but things had changed. His father was now getting along well with Doldos and everyone else. Morid then reached over and patted Laruku on the head. Laruku found the gesture somewhat forceful. On the third day of class, Carl announced that they would be having an icebreaker activity. Each student would present their favorite spell or skill to the class. One of Laruku's classmates, Roke, asked what he planned to show. Laruku thought about it for a moment. He had made frequent use of combination spells and his storage skill, so he decided to demonstrate one of them. Roke was amazed by Laruku's ability to use combination spells. Laruku wondered if it was really that impressive. Believing that the technique became fairly easy once someone got the hang of it, Laruku began by activating his magic and combining fire and water. He then used wind magic to make the resulting mixture levitate. The magic formed into a large floating circle. Laruku encouraged Roke to try touching it. Roke carefully reached out and touched the floating circle. He found that it was warm and was amazed by the result. Laruku believed that anyone could do it if they studied magic properly. Roke explained that many people gave up before they could reach that level. Laruku reacted with mild surprise at the idea. Roke admitted that he could not use combination spells, but he did have a storage skill. Their classmates were surprised to learn that both Laruku and Roke could use storage skills, and they found the ability impressive. One of their classmates wondered whether the skill was really that useful. Roke explained that it was useful, although he mostly treated it as a very convenient back. His skill was called an interdimensional storage box. However, it could not store anything larger than himself. It also had limited space, and he could only store something if he was directly touching it. Lia then pointed out that Laruku's storage box was more useful. He could store things without directly touching them, and his storage space was much larger. Laruku insisted that there was nothing particularly special about his ability. Roke then became curious about the name of Laruku's storage skill. Laruku explained that it was called the useful box. Unlike Roke's skill, the items inside were organized by item type rather than simply being limited by the number of objects he could store. Carl watched the students as they continued comparing their abilities. From his perspective, the icebreaker activity was working well. After class ended, Roke asked Laruku whether he had any plans for the rest of the day. Laruku explained that he wanted to visit the merchant district because there was something he was looking for. Roke insisted on guiding him there since his house was located in that direction. He believed he could probably help Laruku find the item he was searching for. Laruku happily accepted the offer and thanked him. When they arrived at the merchant district, One of the stall owners greeted Roke and recognized him as Goldo's son. As Laruku had expected from the son of the chairman, Roke was already known by many of the people there. Another man approached and asked whether Roke was going home. He also reminded Roke to stay out of that area. Roke agreed before continuing on his way with Laruku. They eventually stopped at a fish stall. The woman running the stall greeted them and pointed out that they had a good selection of fish in stock that day, inviting them to take a look inside. Laruku thanked Roke for helping him, especially since he had managed to buy some good things along the way. Roke was glad to hear that and asked whether Laruku had finally found what he had been looking for. Laruku admitted that he still had not found it. He explained that the ingredient he was searching for was called rice. Roke had never heard of it and wondered what it was. Laruku explained that it was a cooking ingredient. Roke then understood that it was some kind of food and suggested visiting another shop, thinking that Laruku might be able to find it there. They entered another store, where the man running the shop welcomed them. Roke explained that Laruku was his classmate, and Laruku was surprised once again that so many people knew Goldo. Roke introduced the man as Taldora, a longtime employee of their company. He explained that Taldora's store carried rare items that could not easily be found anywhere else, making him the right person to ask about Laruku's search. Taldora asked what Laruku was looking for, and Laruku explained that it was an ingredient called rice. Taldora was surprised that Laruku already knew about it. Laruku explained that he had once read about it in a book. He could not exactly reveal that he had eaten rice in his previous life before being reincarnated. Roke became curious about whether Taldora actually knew about rice. Taldora confirmed that he did. In fact, he had a large amount of it in stock. Since nobody ever bought it, however, he had been at a loss about what to do with all of it. Laruku immediately became interested and asked whether they really had rice in the store. Taldora brought over a box containing it and opened it for them. Roke looked inside and noticed that the contents looked like seeds. He wondered whether that was what Laruku had been searching for. Laruku was overjoyed when he saw it. Taldora could tell that this was indeed what Laruku wanted, while Roke found it surprisingly easy to identify once it was shown to him. Taldora explained that he had been trying to popularize rice because it did not spoil easily and also tasted good. Unfortunately, things had not gone according to plan. Roke admitted that it was his first time seeing it. Laruku then asked how much rice Taldora currently had in stock, mentioning the amount he had seen in the store. Taldora indicated that he had plenty available. Laruku showed him his bags of coins and made it clear that he wanted to buy all of it. Taldora was surprised that Laruku intended to take the entire stock, but Laruku explained that ever since he had read about rice, he had wanted to try it for himself. Laruku then asked whether there was any limit to how much he could purchase. Taldora assured him that there was no limit and that he would be happy to sell all of it to him. Laruku also asked whether Taldora could continue stocking rice from that point onward. Taldora agreed and told him that he could do so for as long as Laruku wished to keep buying it. After returning home, Laruku eagerly waited for the rice to be cooked. At last, he had obtained the rice he had only known about from his memories and reading. Considering the ingredients he currently had available, however, there was only one dish he could make with it. Laruku began frying the rice. While he was cooking, Goldo arrived home and announced that he was back. He immediately noticed the good smell coming from the kitchen. Laruku explained that he had managed to obtain a rare ingredient that day. Goldo had never heard of it before, but he became curious enough to taste the food. After trying it, Goldo was visibly surprised by the flavor. He wondered what kind of food it was and was impressed by Laruku's cooking ability. Laruku was simply glad that his father enjoyed it. Goldo then wanted to know if there was more. Laruku confirmed that there was and encouraged him to help himself. After they finished eating, Laruku felt happy that his father had enjoyed the meal. With the day coming to an end, he prepared to say his prayers to Samadhi before going to bed. However, when Laruku opened his closet, something inside suddenly shined. A strange sensation immediately came over him, and he began to feel dizzy. Before he could understand what was happening, Laruku found himself falling through the air. He was confused as he descended, and moments later he landed on the ground. After losing consciousness, Laruku found himself in a strange wonderland. When he opened his eyes, he felt as though he had been there before. He remembered that he should have been praying to Samadhi, and the familiar feeling only grew stronger. Someone was floating in the air before him. It was Samadhi. Laruku was glad to see him again. Samadhi apologized for calling him so suddenly and for still referring to him as Shinomiya before correcting himself to Laruku. He noted that it had been a while and wondered why Laruku had appeared there again. Laruku immediately thought there was no way he could be dead. Samadhi corrected that assumption and explained that the place was real. Laruku had maxed out his faith the other day, so Samadhi had decided to summon him there. Laruku was confused and shocked. He had not even realized that he had reached the maximum level of faith. He then remembered Samadhi's previous explanation that they would be able to meet again once his faith had developed. Seeing the title of holy man in his status only made him more curious. Samadhi explained that there were two conditions required for Laruku to have an audience with the gods. The first was to level up the skill, and the second was to obtain the proper title. Once Laruku maxed out his faith, he would receive the title of Holy Man. Laruku then had one more question. He wanted to know exactly who the other two people were. The entire place suddenly became dark. In the center, a light appeared and opened up, revealing two gods. The woman introduced herself as Magilt, the god of magic. The man was Gordra, the god of weapons. Laruku was surprised that actual gods had appeared before him. Samadhi explained that this was simply the kind of people they were. Magilt revealed that both she and Gordra had always been interested in Laruku. Because of the actions of that good-for-nothing in the heavenly realm, Laruku had already gone through more misfortune than he should have. She was also curious whether her blessing had been useful to him. Magilt's blessing increased the power of elemental magic while reducing the amount of mana required to use it. Laruku confirmed that it had been extremely helpful, especially because he often used magic. However, he could no longer see the description of Gordra's blessing. Gordra became nervous. The effect of his blessing could be viewed by many people, but when the proper time came for Laruku to learn about it, Gordra would personally appear before him. Until then, Laruku would have to wait. Gordra then left. Magilt explained that Gordra was simply shy. Laruku still considered his blessing extremely useful and looked forward to learning what Gordra's blessing could do. Magilt soon left as well. Laruku was left thinking that the two gods had arrived and disappeared as quickly as a storm. Samadhi clapped his hands, bringing Laruku's attention back to him. It was time to discuss the real reason he had summoned Laruku there. Samadhi struggled to begin. The reason was actually that he needed to apologize to Laruku. Laruku wondered why. Samadhi explained that 2 years earlier, Laruku had suffered because of his incompetence. Laruku remembered that, despite everything, being reincarnated had still been a good thing. His luck stat had been capped at a low level, and his memories had been erased because another god had interfered with his fate. Samadhi wanted to make up for what had happened. He used his magic and gave something to Laruku. He then instructed Laruku to check his status. Laruku did so and discovered that he had obtained a god skill called Miraculous Light. Along with it, he had gained another special ability. Samadhi explained that the skill allowed Laruku to heal any injury or illness as long as the target was still alive. Laruku immediately felt that the ability was far too much of a cheat. Samadhi explained that he had simply turned one of his own powers into a skill and given it to Laruku because he believed Laruku would use it properly. However, there was a limitation. Once Laruku used the skill, he would not be able to use it again for another 3 days. Samadhi reminded him to keep that restriction in mind whenever he decided to use it. Laruku wondered whether Samadhi trusted him too much. Samadhi explained that he had watched over Laruku for those 2 years. Because of that, he had come to trust him. Laruku thanked him for trusting him. He then began thinking about whether he had any injuries or illnesses that could be treated. He also wondered whether the skill could work on old injuries. Samadhi confirmed that it could. It was even powerful enough to completely restore a missing leg. Laruku quietly thought about it for a moment. His father would probably be surprised if his injuries suddenly healed without warning. Samadhi assured him that it should be fine. Laruku remained confused, so Samadhi explained further that devout followers in this world were capable of performing miracles, although such miracles were rare. Because of that, if Laruku told his father that the healing was a miracle granted by the gods, his father would likely understand. Laruku still had his doubts. His father's injuries had been so severe that even the country's healer had been unable to heal them. Samadhi could only hope that Laruku would be able to convince his father and make him accept the miracle without raising too many questions. Samadhi then noticed that morning had already arrived. It was time for him to bid Laruku farewell. Laruku was surprised that they had been there for so long. Samadhi explained that time flowed differently in the heavenly realm compared to the real world. With that, their meeting came to an end, and Samadhi bid Laruku farewell until their next meeting. Laruku returned from his world, and when he opened his eyes, he thought he was still praying. Then he heard something outside. When he peeked out, he saw Goldo had slipped, leaving the kitchen in complete mess. Laruku called out to him, and Goldo greeted him with a good morning. Goldo explained that he had been worried because Laruku had fainted in his room. Laruku realized that he must have fallen asleep in the middle of praying. He also asked about the state of the kitchen, and Goldo admitted that he had thought it would be good to cook breakfast once in a while, but things had not gone as planned. He apologized for being unable to do it properly. Laruku reassured him that it was fine and suggested that they prepare today's breakfast together. The two of them helped each other in the kitchen as they prepared the meal. While working, Laruku kept thinking about using Miraculous Light as soon as possible. However, he was unsure whether everything would go smoothly. The skill was simply too much of a cheat. If word of its power spread, Laruku could easily become a target for the aristocrats or even other countries. His thoughts became so distracting that Goldo had to call his attention for the second time. Laruku finally realized that he had been standing there with a knife in his hand, chopping vegetables. Goldo warned him that it was dangerous to become distracted while using a knife. Laruku explained that he had simply gotten lost in his thoughts for a moment. Goldo noticed that something seemed to be troubling him. He offered to listen if Laruku had any concerns and gently patted his head. Laruku then decided that there was something he needed to tell his father. Goldo was willing to listen. After Laruku finished explaining everything, Goldo revealed that he had heard of such things before. If Laruku continued praying to the gods, he could eventually be granted immense power. Laruku explained that he had decided to use that power on his father. Goldo paused for a moment and looked down. He understood what Laruku intended to do. In any case, it would be good to confirm the effect of the skill. He was ready whenever Laruku was, and he could call him once everything was prepared. Laruku instructed Goldo to stand in the center of the room. Goldo questioned whether that position was suitable, but Laruku was already preparing to begin. Laruku activated his magic. A large magic circle appeared above Goldo's head and began to glow. Goldo became concerned about whether it was safe, but Laruku instructed him not to move. When the process was complete, the steel covering Goldo's leg suddenly came off. Laruku began coughing, but a smile appeared on his face when he saw Goldo's leg. Even then, he was still shocked by what he was seeing. His father could see again. His leg had also been completely restored. Laruku could not hide how relieved he was. He repeatedly expressed how glad he was to see the result. Goldo began running around the room to test his restored leg. Laruku understood that his father was simply overwhelmed with happiness, and Goldo eventually apologized for getting carried away. He was amazed by the result. His body had been completely healed. Laruku asked how he felt, and Goldo felt as though he had returned to his prime. However, the excitement quickly gave way to concern. If other people became aware of such power, it would undoubtedly cause problems. Goldo suggested that they keep the matter hidden from ours and the others. Laruku agreed that it was probably better to keep the skill sealed until he truly needed to use it. Even Goldo remained amazed by what had just happened. Later, Laruku returned to his room and began reading his book while sitting on his bed. He got some rice and healed his father's injuries. All was well that ended well. As Laruku continued reading, he was once again impressed by the author of the book. The author had apparently succeeded in making the work popular in the eastern country. Laruku wondered if that was how Talador had managed to obtain some copies. He wanted to visit that country someday. Then he suddenly heard something. Laruku left his room to investigate and followed the sound until he reached another room. He knocked before opening the door. Inside, he found Goldo still awake. Laruku wondered what he was doing at such a late hour. Goldo apologized for possibly waking him. He explained that he could probably hide his right eye with an eye patch, but if he entered the guild, people would notice his leg. Because of that, he had been thinking about removing the exterior of his prosthetic and modifying it. Laruku immediately insisted on helping him. Goldo thanked him but assured him that he was fine and that Laruku should go back to sleep. Besides, he was too excited to fall asleep anyway, so he considered it the perfect time to work on the prosthetic. Laruku reminded him not to push himself too hard. Goldo laughed, acknowledging the warning before wishing Laruku good night. The next day, someone suddenly arrived at their house while loudly calling Laruku's name and asking whether he was there. When they went outside, they discovered that it was Doldos. Goldo questioned why he was being so loud and wanted to know what had happened. Doldos apologized for making such a commotion, then grabbed Laruku and urgently pulled him along. A small bear lodging was in trouble. Laruku and Goldo arrived at Dat's inn, where Dats apologized for bothering them so early in the morning. Laruku did not mind, especially since Doldos seemed to be quite panicked. Dats also thanked Goldo for coming, and Laruku asked what exactly the emergency at the small bear lodging was. Dats explained that their food storage had been ruined and asked them to follow him for a moment. When they entered another room, they found rats running around while food was scattered across the floor. Laruku could immediately see that the rats had caused quite a mess, and Dats agreed. Doldos had been helping him exterminate them, working alongside him to get rid of the pests. When one rat suddenly ran in front of Laruku, Anna jumped onto her father's back. Dats explained that Anna had been acting like that the entire time, leading Laruku to guess that she was not good with rats. Anna quickly made it clear that she was not nearly as bad with rats as her mother. Dats then told Laruku that he had a favor to ask of him, and Laruku asked what he needed. Later on, Laruku and the others traveled by carriage. As he looked out through the window, he remembered Dats explaining that several weeks' worth of food had been completely ruined, leaving them without enough supplies. Since there were not enough people available to go out and buy replacements, Laruku had taken on the task of helping them restock. Dats thanked him and began preparing the carriage. He asked how many people Laruku would need, but Laruku stopped him and explained that he had storage skills, meaning he could go by himself. Dats hugged him in appreciation, clearly impressed by how helpful he was. However, despite Laruku's confidence that he could handle the trip alone, Goldo stood beside them looking displeased. Laruku reassured Goldo that Dats would be coming with him, so there was no need to worry. Dats also explained that there would be a lot of things to buy, which was why he thought it would be better to accompany Laruku himself. Goldo still remained concerned. He believed Laruku did not understand how dangerous things could become and that Dats alone might not be able to protect him if something happened. During the journey, Dats pointed out that Goldo was being overly protective. Goldo could not deny it, while Laruku simply laughed at the situation. When they arrived at their destination, Laruku asked if he could look around at some of the other stores after they finished shopping. Goldo allowed it but warned him not to go too far. He also reminded Laruku that if anything happened he should call out for help. After the shopping was finished, Laruku began looking around at the various stores. He eventually stopped at a weapon shop, and Goldo followed him inside while also looking around. Laruku examined the weapons with interest, while Goldo kept an eye on him. He eventually called out to his father and asked whether they were finished shopping. Goldo confirmed that they were, but Laruku was not convinced that they had to leave so soon. He still wanted to explore more of the city. Goldo eventually asked whether Laruku was ready to return, and Laruku accepted. They gathered all the food they had purchased and placed it inside Laruku's storage box. Once everything was prepared, they returned to the inn. Doldos welcomed them when they arrived, while Dats made it clear that Laruku had been a great help. Dats then asked whether they had managed to finish exterminating the rats. Doldos confirmed that they had cleaned them up and were already in the middle of disposing of the spoiled food. Dats appreciated their help and decided to prepare a luxurious meal for Laruku as thanks. Doldos also informed him that the floor of the storeroom had broken. Although he had managed to patch it up temporarily, the floor still needed to be properly repaired. Dats wondered whether Doldos had fallen through the broken floor. The other adventurers laughed as they confirmed that he had, explaining that Doldos had fit snugly into the opening. Dats invited Laruku and Goldo to join them, and Laruku apologized for bothering him. Goldo agreed, and once they sat down, Laruku looked toward the window. From outside he could hear two girls talking. One of them was complaining about how cold it was, while the other mentioned that she was covered in dust after cleaning. She wondered whether the dirt would come off if she washed herself with dirty water. Hearing this gave Laruku an idea. He turned to Dats and asked if he could tell him about something. The group then went outside, leaving the other adventurers confused about what was happening and whether something was about to take place. Laruku placed his hand on the ground and considered using earth magic to raise the ground while strengthening the inside so that no dirt would get into it. He then brought out his useful box, which contained a large amount of water that was still hot. There was more than enough water, and it was ready to be used. Laruku poured the hot water into the hole he had dug and revealed that he had created a simple bath. Steam rose from the warm water, making it clear that it was ready to use. Laruku encouraged everyone to feel free to use it, and the crowd immediately became excited, cheering happily at what he had made. Dats was impressed that Laruku had actually made a bath. At first, he had thought Laruku was only joking when he mentioned the idea, but seeing the finished result made it clear how capable he really was. Laruku reminded everyone to calm down because the bath was not going anywhere. Goldo agreed with Dats' praise and made it clear that Laruku was his pride and joy. Laruku then went back inside and knocked on the door before informing Imelda that they had finished exterminating the rats. Imelda was surprised that they had already finished and asked whether it was really true. Laruku confirmed that it was and that not a single rat remained. Imelda apologized for making Laruku see her in such a pathetic state, but Laruku only chuckled. He did not mind it and understood that everyone had something they were not good at. Anna then took the opportunity to ask Laruku for help with her studies now that he had finished dealing with the rats. She wanted him to help her study just as he had before, and Laruku agreed to help her. The next day, Laruku had become quite used to his school life. He had learned that the top students at the academy were given various privileges, and recently, he had been making frequent use of one of them. Laruku counted the books he was holding, making sure that he had not forgotten anything. He was grateful that he could freely borrow books from the library. Normally, students were forbidden from taking the books outside, but top students were given permission to borrow them and bring them home. Wallace noticed Laruku and asked whether he had come to borrow more books. Laruku confirmed that he had and explained that he had already finished all the books he had borrowed the previous time. Being able to take books home was convenient because he could read them during his commute. Wallace then reminded Laruku that it was almost time for his next class and that he should head over soon. Laruku agreed and realized that he needed to hurry, borrow a book, and return to class. Participating in classes was another privilege given to the academy's top students. Laruku did not have to attend classes that he considered unnecessary. However, there was a condition attached to that privilege. If he failed to reach a certain grade on the periodic tests, his privileges would immediately be taken away. For the time being, Laruku had no intention of using that privilege to skip classes. He actually found the lessons enjoyable, so he continued attending them. After Laruku finished his class, he found Goldo waiting for him. Laruku asked his father how things were going with his work at the guild, and Goldo explained that he had already finished everything that morning. Goldo then asked whether Laruku had any plans for later. Laruku had nothing particular planned, so Goldo asked if he could accompany him somewhere. Laruku naturally wanted to know where they were going, but Goldo refused to reveal the destination until they arrived. When they reached a store, a man greeted them and welcomed the rare customer. Goldo exchanged a handshake with him and asked how Furno had been doing before asking what kind of business he had today. Goldo explained that he wanted Furno to make something for him. He then introduced his son, Laruku, to Furno. Furno immediately noticed how small Laruku was. Seeing Goldo bring such a tiny boy into his store made him briefly wonder whether Goldo had somehow kidnapped him. Even so, Furno quickly realized that this small boy was Goldo's son. Furno noticed that Laruku did not look much like Goldo, and Goldo explained that they were not related by blood. There was a lot behind their relationship, so he planned to explain more about it another time. For now, he asked Furno to measure Laruku, and Furno agreed to handle it. Laruku was unsure whether Furno was really going to measure him, but Goldo confirmed that he was. Furno stretched out his measuring tape, while Laruku remained confused about what was happening. Furno then realized that Laruku had apparently arrived without knowing anything about the visit. Goldo admitted that he had been planning to explain everything to him at that moment, while Furno teased him for keeping it a surprise and told him to stop talking. Goldo believed that Laruku should have customized weapons and armor made specifically for him. Since Laruku had already gotten used to school life, Goldo thought it was finally time for him to start going outside more. Laruku was surprised by the idea and immediately became excited at the thought of going out. The sudden announcement caught him off guard, and he was surprised that Goldo had planned something like this. Goldo was pleased with himself, wanting to be the one who surprised Laruku from time to time. Furno eventually finished taking Laruku's measurements. Goldo asked how long it would take to complete the equipment, and Furno estimated that it would be ready in 3 days. Goldo planned to return and pick everything up in 4 days and asked about the price. Furno initially decided that because the request had come from none other than Goldo, he would make it free. Goldo immediately rejected that idea. This would be the first present he was giving his son, so naturally he wanted to pay for it. Furno thought about the matter for a moment before settling on a price of 5 silver coins. Goldo became irritated because he thought the price was far too cheap. Furno pointed out that if Goldo already knew what the equipment should cost, then he should somehow return the time Furno had spent thinking about the price. Goldo argued that he had absolutely no intention of accepting such a large discount. Laruku watched the two of them and began to think that both men were strange. Furno laughed at Goldo's behavior, pointing out that those were hardly the words of a customer. He then turned his attention toward Laruku and confirmed his name. Furno also remarked that having such a stubborn father must be difficult. Laruku did not see it that way. He felt that having Goldo as his father was not difficult at all, and he was always grateful for everything Goldo did for him. The words left both Furno and Goldo quiet for a moment. Goldo's face turned red, and Furno immediately noticed, teasing the usually tough and famous Goldo for blushing. Goldo became embarrassed and told Furno to stop before turning his attention back to Laruku. With everything finished for the day, he took Laruku and prepared to head home. 3 days passed as Laruku continued attending his classes, listening to lessons and learning more about magic. On the 4th day, he returned to Furno's shop and immediately checked whether his equipment had been completed. Furno confirmed that everything was completely finished and brought out the equipment for him to see. Laruku was amazed when he saw it. Furno then showed him the gloves and shoes and asked him to come closer so he could explain how they worked. The equipment Furno had created was designed to increase Laruku's status simply by being worn. Laruku was surprised that the effects worked just by putting them on, and Furno confirmed that they did. Furno possessed something known as the God of Weapons Blessing. Because of this ability, he could enhance equipment with various effects, allowing him to create items far beyond ordinary weapons and armor. When Laruku tried the equipment on, he was immediately surprised by how light it felt. Furno had taken Laruku's build and his close combat fighting style into account when designing everything, making sure the equipment would suit the way he moved. Laruku also noticed how shiny the equipment was. Furno explained that the reason for its appearance was that he had used dragon scales in its construction. Goldo immediately reacted in shock when he heard that. He quietly pointed out to Furno that dragon scales were premium materials that even high-ranking adventurers had difficulty obtaining. Their value alone far exceeded the price of the entire set. Goldo could hardly believe that someone had made such equipment for a beginner, questioning whether Furno had ever seen a beginner wearing materials like that before. Furno did not think Laruku needed to match everyone else. He simply wanted to give him something worthy of him and congratulate him. Goldo became upset again and insisted that Furno should let him pay more for the equipment. Furno stopped him and firmly refused to accept any additional payment. Once again, Laruku watched the two men and found their behavior strange. Before long, the two began arguing with each other again. Laruku called their attention and thanked both of them for what they had done. Furno then praised Goldo for having such a good son, and Goldo confidently believed that Laruku would continue to be one. As Laruku stood by the window, his attention slowly shifted outside. He looked beyond the city and began wondering what the world outside the city was like.